Hello, and thank you for listening to the 170th episode of Congressional Dish. I'm your host, Jennifer Briney. And today's episode is about a beautiful place with a horrifically dysfunctional government system called Puerto Rico. I can't really say that correctly because I'm white as hell. But Puerto Rico, it's kind of close. But I'm just going to say it with my, white chick accent. Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, which means that the island is controlled by the U.S. federal government, and the people who live there are U.S. citizens, but without all of the rights granted to the rest of us U.S. citizens. And shamefully, my entire life up until 2016, I didn't know anything about that relationship. I thought Puerto Rico was another country, but I was wrong. But my fascination and my journey to attempt to understand Puerto Rico started in the summer of 2016 when Congress created a fiscal control board to essentially run the government of Puerto Rico. And so the first episode I produced about the island was Congressional Dish 128, Crisis in Puerto Rico, which was from that summer of 2016, and it's all about the fiscal control board. Now, I'm going to give you a quick summary as I go in this episode about what the board is, but I just know myself and I'm going to end up saying things that are inside baseball, which you will understand completely if you take the time to press pause, go back, listen to Congressional Dish 128, Crisis in Puerto Rico, before listening to this episode. It will really help you with the context. I also produced a follow-up episode about Puerto Rico exactly a year ago in March 2017, when I visited Puerto Rico for a workcation and gobbled up as much information as I could about the United States government relationship with the Puerto Rican people. In that episode, in episode 147, Controlling Puerto Rico, I learned about our shameful history with Puerto Rico. I learned about how we conquered the island, denying them their freedom. And then how 100 years ago, we made Puerto Ricans citizens of the United States so we can send them to fight in our war, but we didn't give them votes in our governmental system. Even today, Puerto Ricans can't vote for president, and they don't really have representation in Congress, as they have no representation at all in the Senate, and their representative in the House, their commissioner, doesn't get to vote, not in any real way. And I loved episode 147, and it remains a fan favorite. So I recommend listening to that one too, even though it's not exactly a prerequisite for this episode. If you only have time for one, choose 128, because the fiscal control board in Puerto Rico is key to understanding everything that's happening right now with the government of Puerto Rico as they try to recover from the hurricane. But on that March 2017 trip, I experienced Puerto Rico for the first time. We went to touristy areas like Old San Juan and Luquillo and Isla Verde. I always want to say Isla Verde because that's how it's spelled, but it's Isla Verde. But we drove for hours around the island, off the beaten path, to see what life in the neighborhoods looked like. And this is when I fell in love with Puerto Rico. I love the warm ocean water, it reminded me of Hawaii. And the stunning natural beauty also reminded me of Hawaii. I wasn't expecting a giant mountain range in the center of the island. And I certainly fell in love with the joyful, loud, friendly people of Puerto Rico. I missed the sound of Spanish when I came home. And oh my God, the food. The food is so good. And so I left saying that I don't know when, but someday I'll be back. And then 6 months later, on September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria, a Category 4 chainsaw of a hurricane, slammed into the southeast side of the island, right into the town of Yubacoa. It then sliced right through the center of the island, and the electricity for the whole island was wiped out, and I mean wiped out. The transmission lines were gone, even the big ones. And that's the part of the emergency that 6 months later still hasn't ended in Puerto Rico for way too many people. It was strange being there, really, because what I witnessed was that the situation in Puerto Rico was simultaneously far worse than what I was expecting, but also far better. And by the end of this episode, I think you'll understand what I mean by that. And so in this episode, I'm going to start with the bad stuff. The story I'm going to tell you is an incomplete story about what's going on mainly with their electricity situation. And there are important dots here that I think we all just need to add to our brain banks about what is happening in Puerto Rico. And then in the second half of the episode, my friend Miranda Hanna, who you met in the last episode, she's going to join me again for the thank yous. And so during that portion of the show, you'll get to listen in on a conversation with one of my close friends about the wonderful parts of my experience in Puerto Rico. As we say thank you, of course, to the listeners, you, who make this show possible with your voluntary financial support that ensures that this podcast is ad-free and always will be. Because this year, The way I ended up back in Puerto Rico is that my friend, Ryan Delisle, who you met in the thank yous 3 or 4 episodes ago, he was also in the episode 147 because he was in Puerto Rico with me last year. Well, he and I have celebrated our birthday month, March, with a vacation every year now for a few years. And he found a great bargain on an Airbnb in Luquillo, which is a little town with a fantastic beach park about 45 minutes east of San Juan. And so last year when we were floating in the perfect warm water at the Luquillo Beach Park and where the shade was on the sand and the breeze was light and warm and the beers were 76 cents. I mean, it was heaven on earth. As we were there, we said we wanted to spend more time in this location when we eventually come back. And so that's where we stayed this time. We stayed in Luquillo. But I remember that when Maria hit, the whole time, as I was obsessively watching the Weather Channel coverage, I thought of 2 places in particular, constantly, that Ryan and I had gone to in 2017. One was in Luquillo. It was one of the reasons I wanted to stay there. It was this tiny little food stand called Wepa Arepa, and it was one of many shops and restaurants that was lined up right along the water in Luquillo. And the reason I was obsessing over this one particular stand is that I had met the owner when I was there. I wanted to try some Puerto Rican food. Ryan was getting pizza, and so I was there by myself. And this guy came up and asked me if I had any questions. And of course I did. I didn't know what any of this stuff was. Mofongo, like what? So, so I ended up talking to him for a while, and he introduced me to not only his food, but his business and his life a little bit, because as he was cooking, he was telling me that he had 2 locations and he was just a really, really nice guy. And you could just tell that he was so proud of this little business that he had created. And like I said, it was right on the water. And so I was worried about him because he was someone that I felt like I connected to in Puerto Rico. And I wanted him to be okay. And then the other place I worried about was on the southeast corner of the island, right where the eye of the hurricane hit. And to this day, when I refer to this place, I call it Our Bar because it was just a place that Ryan and I went to, but I don't know the name of it. I'm not entirely sure it had a name, and I didn't connect with anyone there because no one there, no one that worked there, no one who was hanging out there, no one spoke a lick of English. The way that we ended up there is that we were driving around the island off the beaten path, and we certainly were off the beaten path with this place. And we got stuck in a crazy rainstorm, and it was raining so hard, and I had been driving for hours at this point, and I couldn't see out of the damn windshield. And then we saw a sign through the rain that said, Coronas, $1. Sold. So we pulled over and we went on their little patio and we drank our $1 Coronas, and we were sheltered from the rain because they had a nice canopy that was protecting us. And so we got to sit outside in this warm, beautiful rainstorm. And we thought we were going to die, honestly, when we were there, because some guy walked in with a machete. We're like, oh God, here we go. This is how the horror movie starts. But no, he had it for coconuts. And then there were a bunch of other people that rolled up with machetes, and they were just at this house that was next door, busting open coconuts. And yeah, so it was just one of those experiences that Ryan and I are going to remember forever. And so as I was watching the hurricane go towards the island, I kept thinking of Our Bar because it was right in the eye of the storm. And so I've thought about these 2 places often since the hurricane. And so when Ryan emailed me and told me he found an insanely affordable 2-bedroom penthouse Airbnb with a panoramic view of the ocean available for $75 a night exactly 1 year after our first trip, I jumped at the chance to go back. Now, clearly a beach vacation was a motivation, but I also wanted to see if those places were still standing. I wanted to see for myself what was happening on the island. You know, do people actually have electricity? How about water? Can you get around the island? Are the roads and bridges really washed away? Is the island ready for tourists? And I knew that I was one of the first ones. We were taking a risk, but it was worth it to me because I had so many questions, and going there was the only way to get the answers. And yes, there was another factor, which was that if I was going to blow a bunch of money on a vacation, I wanted my money to go to Puerto Rico right now. And so we went back. And for the first few days, I just full on vacation. Well, I can't say that. That's actually not true. The very first day that we get there, the first thing I did after getting the rental car is Joe and I went to Wepa Arepa. And they weren't open, but only because it was a Thursday. I am very, very happy to tell you that Wepa Arepa is open now. They're opening 4 days a week, which is It's great. I don't know if that's how they always did it, but we definitely got to have their incredible food. And I saw the owner. He's doing well. And his mother was working with him. So the little family business is up and running. They have 2 locations. Only the Luquillo location is open. But they're doing well and they're getting back on their feet. So I was just so thrilled to see that it was still there, along with all of the other, well, most of the bars and restaurants. There are still some that are under construction, but Luquillo's doing really well. And it wasn't the worst case scenario there. Unfortunately, my other bar, the one that was in the eye of the hurricane, didn't do so well. The overhang that we sat under, that roof that protected us from the rain and allowed us to drink our Coronas outside, it's gone. I mean, that roof is completely gone, and there's no signs that this place has been reopened since the hurricane. In fact, I'm not sure that anywhere in that area has electricity. I just didn't see any signs that was the case. That area was a real mess. And so this is what I mean. It was a good news, bad news situation. I was so happy for Wepa Repa and so sad for my bar. And it's just, you're going to hear in this episode, that type of stuff just kept happening. But yeah, so I went on vacation for the first few days and I just experienced Puerto Rico, the sights and the people. And then because I just couldn't help myself, I did get worky for my last few days there. And I did some investigating and I met locals, including a member of the Congressional Dish family, Angela Fletcher, who I now consider a personal friend and who was so kind in taking us on a tour of her hometown, Yubacoa, which was the first town hit and hardest hit by Maria's fury. But then I also drove around the outside of about half the island, off the beaten path, just like last year, to bear witness, to compare what I saw this year to what I saw last year, to see with my own eyes what picture should be painted about Puerto Rico to those of us who are on the mainland. And then I didn't plan it this way, but when we flew back home, we flew home on the 6-month anniversary of Hurricane Maria. And so as I was researching this episode on the plane rides back from Puerto Rico, which I had so many delays, we were in transit for like 17 hours. I had tons of time to read. But there were a flood of Puerto Rico articles that were appearing in all kinds of mainstream publications. I knew from the first article that I read, it was an AP article that I've included for you in the show notes, of course. But I knew from the very first article that I was going to be upset by a lot of the information being passed to us on the mainland, because the perception portrayed in most of these articles, with some notable exceptions, like Naomi Klein's article in The Intercept. Most of the good articles I read are the ones from The Intercept, and you can find them in the show notes. But most of the mainstream press accounts that I read didn't match my perceptions on the ground. And so today's episode are the dots that are making up my perception of what's going on in Puerto Rico. And on the way to Puerto Rico, I watched every congressional hearing that I could find with Puerto Rico's Fiscal Control Board members. And shamefully, Congress hasn't asked them to testify since November, but I still learned plenty, and you will too. And what I've learned, and you will too, is that big changes to the government of Puerto Rico are happening at lightning speed right now. It's a real shock doctrine situation down there. And so I'll tell you as much as I know. And I know that much of this is going to be anecdotal, but as always, these episodes contain all of my sources in the show notes. There are articles and reports and testimony. There is so much information in this episode show notes. And so I encourage you to take a look at this stuff for yourselves, because I am not pretending to be an expert on Puerto Rico. I've been there twice. But I am a U.S. citizen curious and worried about what is happening to other U.S. citizens on an island with major problems, many of them created by a Congress that Puerto Ricans can't, but we mainlanders can control. I feel an obligation to my brothers and sisters in Puerto Rico because they do. So just listen to this episode and know that Congress is ultimately in control of this situation, which means that you and I, if you are a U.S. citizen with voting rights in the 50 official U.S. states, well, it's up to you and I to pressure our Congress for whatever Puerto Rico needs, because they can't do it themselves. They need us to keep paying attention. But like I said, and like you'll hear in the thank yous, I will also tell you about my experience as a tourist there, because even though there is some shady stuff that we're going to have to fight for on behalf of Puerto Ricans, there's also truly wonderful things happening in Puerto Rico. I loved being there, and I cannot recommend going there highly enough. And so, like I said, it was a good news, bad news kind of trip. But to fully understand the stories I'm about to tell you, you need some backstory. And so here we go. So I'm going to start this story towards the end of the W. Bush years, when some U.S. government decisions decimated manufacturing on the island. Because in the late W. Bush years, the island was hit with a double whammy. The U.S. government had signed free trade deals with countries with virtually no labor laws, like Mexico and China, which, even as many mainland states can testify, created a wave of companies moving their operations overseas, where these companies could pay their workers essentially indentured servitude wages in order to increase the amount of money that could be funneled to their shareholders. And then at the same time, in 2006, a series of corporate-friendly tax breaks, specifically for manufacturers in Puerto Rico, expired thanks to decisions made in Congress and by President Clinton. And so a lot of manufacturers that were still there then left the island in search of higher profit situations. As a result, a lot of Puerto Ricans lost their jobs. And as a result of that, the tax revenue, both from income taxes and sales taxes, were slashed, causing the government of Puerto Rico to start racking up some serious debts. The situation only got worse as people started moving away from Puerto Rico by the hundreds of thousands. And around the beginning of the Obama administration, Puerto Rico's bond rating was dramatically downgraded, making it super expensive for the Puerto Rican government to borrow money to keep their government functioning. Then the investment banks swooped in like vultures with an offer that the people in charge of keeping the island running just couldn't refuse: quick cash. And so, not unlike payday loans, the catch was that they would give the government of Puerto Rico money, but the interest rates they demanded in return on the bonds were sky high. And so here's the situation today. This is Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont questioning the current governor of Puerto Rico, a guy I called Cutie Pie in a recent episode because he looks like the adult version of little Ricky Ricardo with gorgeous eyes, named Ricardo Rossello.
Puerto Rico is struggling with an unsustainable $75 billion debt and $49 billion in pension obligations. More than one-third of that debt is held by Wall Street vulture funds that are getting interest rates of up to 34% on tax-exempt bonds they purchased for as little as 29 cents on the dollar. Is that correct, Governor?
Yep. $75 billion in debt. A lot of that is interest. But that number is questionable. Because, for example, when the debt was being created over the last 20 years, Citigroup and Goldman Sachs in particular invented a new kind of loan that, in theory, let the bankers get around Puerto Rico's debt limit and their balanced budget requirements, which resulted in an additional $17 billion in debt. Now, I say this allowed them to issue these loans in theory because it was an arrangement that many people who give more shits about Puerto Rican citizens than the banks think were illegal loans. And there are legal challenges raging in the courts on this subject as I speak. And because of scandals like this, a lot of Puerto Ricans question the real amount of debt that the island owes. And fun fact, the previous governor, who was less corporate friendly than the current governor Cutie Pie, well, the previous governor started an audit of the debt to find out how much Puerto Rico really owes. However, Governor Cutie Pie and his political partners in the Puerto Rican Congress killed that audit last year. This led to at least 50,000 Puerto Ricans marching to demand that the audit be restarted. And the only thing that killing an audit does is ensure that Puerto Rico officially remains indebted to the banks for the full $75 billion, which is just one of many corporate-friendly Puerto Rico screwing decisions that this current Puerto Rican government has made. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Flashing back to the summer of 2015, in response to Puerto Rico's crushing debt problem, a well-known report known as the Kruger Report was written by the Masters of the Universe for Puerto Rico. This report has served as the building block for all of the plans and policies that are in the process of being implemented right now. This plan was written by economists with long histories in the world trade system, specifically the International Monetary Fund. One of the three authors, and the person who the report is named after, is Anne Kruger, who is the chief economist at the World Bank from 1982 to 1986, and she was the first deputy managing director of the International Monetary Fund from 2001 to 2006. She was also briefly in charge of the IMF for a few months in 2004. Another one of the authors was Ranjit Teja. He worked for multiple departments at the International Monetary Fund from 2008 to 2014. He is now currently an advisor to the multinational banking behemoth Morgan Stanley International, which is one of the banks holding billions of dollars in Puerto Rican debt that they want repaid. And then the third author of the master plan for Puerto Rico was Andrew Wolf, who was the senior manager of the Western Hemisphere Department for the International Monetary Fund, where he worked for 27 years before retiring to advise Puerto Rico in 2014. And I do want to mention that 2 out of these 3 people are also now professors at prestigious universities, which helps to explain why the policies of the World Trade System have so much staying power despite all of the proven history of failure, debt, and violence. But anyway, these International Monetary Fund people created a plan for Puerto Rico, which featured all of the International Monetary Fund's greatest hits. The main problem that they identify in Puerto Rico is a lack of growth, not sustainability, growth, because their entire economic system is a cancer. And the reforms that their plan demanded included, quote, local and federal action to lower labor costs, unquote, which are also known as worker paychecks. And they concluded that, quote, the U.S. federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour is too high, unquote. They advised Puerto Rico to seek an exemption from federal minimum wage laws. And that exemption was granted a year later by the PROMESA law that created the Fiscal Control Board. That law allows the minimum wage to be lowered to $4.25 an hour for new employees under the age of 25 until 2020. And since I was just there, I can promise you that this is not okay. Puerto Rico, I mean, it's not super expensive. If you go there as a tourist, you're not going to be like, oh, it's nothing like San Francisco, I can tell you that. But it's also not really a bargain. Groceries cost just about the same as what we pay here on the mainland, and the same with the restaurants. In fact, their electricity costs even more, and gas is about the same. But the thing that I want to get across is, like, can you support yourself on $4.25 an hour? Because if the answer is no, then that goes the same for Puerto Ricans. And so that's already a Puerto Rican reality. But the master plan also has some other recommendations. And I don't know, honestly, if these or similar policies have been implemented yet. But the International Monetary Fund people are also directing Puerto Rico to define overtime as over 40 hours per week, not 8 hours per day, which is or was Puerto Rican law. They also want vacation days cut to mainland levels from 30 days to 15 days. They also want end-of-year bonuses to be killed, which I know they've actually already done for Puerto Rican government workers. The International Monetary Fund people also want local regulations requiring just cause for layoffs to be killed too, so that firing workers is easier. They also want probationary periods, which allow bosses to withhold benefits from new employees, to be extended from 3 months to 1 to 2 years. And they just want to straight up kill labor laws for young employees, just like they killed the minimum wage laws for generations screwed. And the IMFers also, surprise, surprise, want to cut welfare benefits. And they want the removal of obstacles to the ease of doing business. Their words, not mine. They also want electricity generation privatized, and they recommended a fiscal oversight board. And 1 year after this report was published, Congress obliged. In July of 2016, President Obama signed PROMESA into law. PROMESA, tomato. But this was the law that created the Fiscal Control Board and my fascination with Puerto Rico. And one thing that I have to remind you of is that this law applies to all territories, not just Puerto Rico. So even though Puerto Rico is the only one right now with a fiscal control board, the other territories, such as also hurricane-ravaged Virgin Islands and the Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, all of our territories can now legally be cursed with fiscal control boards of their own. Now, PROMESA clearly states that the goal of the Fiscal Control Board is to ensure that the territorial government, so Puerto Rico, should be a, quote, facilitator and not a competitor to private enterprise, unquote. And it is in charge of finding a way to get Puerto Rico's financial house back in order, including paying the bankers. And to that end, the Puerto Rico Fiscal Control Board was then stuffed with bankers, because Puerto Ricans were given no role in selecting their overlords. The oversight board members were chosen by, well, 2 of them were chosen by Paul Ryan, 2 were chosen by Mitch McConnell, 1 was chosen by Nancy Pelosi, 1 was chosen by Harry Reid, and 1 was chosen by Barack Obama. Now, there were some rules about who they could choose. One rule is that no one who has worked for the territory's government or Puerto Rico's government was allowed on the oversight board. And then the governor of Puerto Rico, he's technically on the board, but as an ex officio member, which means he has no voting rights. He's basically just a witness. So there is not a single member of the Oversight Board who is elected by the Puerto Rican people. Not one, because that is expressly prohibited by law. And so who is on the board? Well, the Fiscal Control Board is headed by a white lady named Natalie Jaresko, a Ukrainian investment banker who was Ukraine's Minister of Finance in the new government of Ukraine from December 2014 until April 2016. Natalie Jaresko was born in Illinois, and over the course of her career, she held several positions at the U.S. State Department. And so she is unquestionably American, but she's also now a Ukrainian citizen. She was granted Ukrainian citizenship by the new government the day she was appointed to run Ukraine's economy in December 2014. Is your spidey sense firing right now? Because if you've been listening to Congressional Dish lately, it should be. Are you remembering episode 167 when I told you in detail about how in the beginning of 2014, people you know in the U.S. government like Joe Biden, how they played a key role in overthrowing the government of Ukraine in order to get Ukraine to economically partner with Europe and the World Trade System instead of with Russia? Because that's right. Just 9 months after that coup, this chick from the State Department with a long working history with the IMF, the lady currently in charge of the Fiscal Control Board of Puerto Rico, she was put in charge of Ukraine's economy. And when she was put in charge of Ukraine's economy, do you want to know what she did? She made an agreement with the International Monetary Fund for a $40 billion loan to Ukraine, as long as Ukraine would change their economic laws. All this shit is connected. And so when we think of the masters of the universe, which is the nickname I'm using for people dedicated to creating a global economic system based on freedom for multinational corporations and the accumulation of shareholder wealth implemented by issuing loans to desperate countries in return for changes to their economic laws and enforced with the U.S. military, well, we need to add the name Natalie Jaresko to our list, along with Joe Biden and Victoria Nuland, Condoleezza Rice, John McCain, Hillary Clinton, the entire Bush family. Well, this lady at the head of Puerto Rico's Fiscal Control Board, she's one of them too. Two of the board's other current members, Jose Ramon Gonzalez and Carlos Garcia, are both former executives at the Spanish bank Santander, and both of them were in charge of some Puerto Rican accounts while they worked there. Under their watch, their bank processed $61.2 billion of the island's at least $74 billion in debt. And then over the last several years, both Gonzalez and Garcia have ping-ponged between working at Santander Bank and in leadership positions at the Puerto Rico's Government Development Bank, which is the body responsible for issuing government bonds. And so on one end, they got paid to issue the bonds, and then on the other end, they got paid to accept them. And now they're getting paid to be appointed to this dictatorial board charged with cleaning up the mess that they made on both sides of the transactions. In addition to the regular board members, there's also a revitalization coordinator position, whose job it is to identify and approve of critical infrastructure projects in Puerto Rico. Now, after this guy chooses his favored projects, he is in charge of getting the relevant agencies in Puerto Rico's government to create an expedited permitting process for his chosen projects. And part of his job description, as mandated by our Congress in the PROMESA law, is that his assessments of critical projects needs to include how the project contributes, quote, to transitioning to privatized generation capacities in Puerto Rico, unquote. That law was signed in the summer of 2016, over a year before Hurricane Maria. And so privatizing Puerto Rico's electricity, at least the generation part of it, has always been a part of the Fiscal Control Board mission. And I want you to remember that as we move forward. Now, the guy who was hired for the revitalization coordinator job is a guy named Noel Zammot, who is actually not a banker. He's a retired Air Force colonel and the owner of a cybersecurity company. Now, from his own LinkedIn page, this is how he views his role in Puerto Rico. He describes it as this, quote, as revitalization coordinator, Mr. Zammot provides incentives for private investment in Puerto Rico's critical infrastructure, unquote. And so his job, as he sees it, is not to get the lights back on or to improve the infrastructure by the most cost-effective means. No, it is to get the private sector to spend and make money off of Puerto Rico's infrastructure. And I view those goals as two separate things. And you know who's paying for all of this? The citizens of Puerto Rico. Because the Oversight Board is funded by the permanent budget of Puerto Rico in an amount that is chosen by the board itself at a rate of at least $2 million per month. And in fact, in the board's first year of existence, it spent quite a bit more than that. They spent $31 million of Puerto Rico's money, or I should say they added $31 million to Puerto Rico's debt. And so what the fuck are they doing with all that money, you might ask? Well, because PROMESA allowed the Oversight Board to write the laws governing its own activities, including how much they will be paid for their services, they decided that they would spend $28 million for services. And here's how much they decided to pay themselves. This following clip is of Representative Luis Gutierrez of Illinois. The first person he's going to address is the mayor of a Puerto Rican town. Next will be Noel Zammit, the revitalization coordinator on the Fiscal Control Board. And the last will be the head of the board, the master of the universe, Natalie Jaresko.
Mayor, thank you very much for being here with us. Could you tell us your annual salary? Yes.
$96,000.
$96,000. Mr. Zammit, what's your annual salary? I'm sorry?
Sir, I think it's a matter of public record.
How much is it?
I think it's in the record, sir.
Just, can't you tell us how much it is? You know how much you're getting paid. Why are you so reluctant to give us, this is a committee, just want to know how much you're getting paid. The mayor was very forthcoming.
The board found a competitive compensation of $315,000.
So I'll ask Mrs. Jaresko, I didn't get to ask you, what's your annual salary?
$625,000.
$625,000.
$625,000 a year plus her relocation expenses from Ukraine to San Juan, a security detail, a chauffeur, and a monthly trip to Kiev, Ukraine, because that is where her home is. She must have forgotten to mention that to Congress. But all of that is paid for by the bankrupt Puerto Rican government. At least Noel Zammit knew to be embarrassed about that. And so when is all of this scheduled to end? Well, the termination of the Oversight Board isn't going to happen until Puerto Rico balances its budget for 4 consecutive years and until the Oversight Board certifies that the banks are willing to lend to Puerto Rico again. And so the board will not be dissolved until the bankers are pleased with their work. And the thing about this board is that it has extraordinary power over the island. It has the power and the obligation to approve of the island's fiscal plans. Now, the way that this is working right now is that fiscal plans are being submitted by the governor, and the Oversight Board has to eventually certify one of them. Maybe. Because it also has the option to certify a fiscal plan that is developed by the Oversight Board itself. And if that's what they choose to do, it's going to be deemed approved by the governor. So after this fiscal plan is finished, the courts are not allowed to consider challenges to the Oversight Board's decisions. And then, as far as oversight is concerned, Puerto Rico is prohibited from exercising, quote, any control, supervision, oversight, or review over the Oversight Board or its activities, unquote. The board and the Puerto Rican government are still working on finding their perfect fiscal plan, with the process getting delayed by Hurricane Maria. The former governor, Garcia Padilla, had his plan rejected by the Fiscal Control Board last year. And after their rejection, he refused to change his plan, which essentially kicked the can into the new cutie pie administration. Now, before the hurricane, there had been 4 fiscal plans submitted by cutie pie Ricardo Rossello, but the Fiscal Control Board kept rejecting those too, demanding more cuts, specifically to reduce working hours of government employees and to cut their pension benefits. And the relationship between the Puerto Rican government and the Fiscal Control Board got so contentious before the hurricane that when Cutie Pie refused to implement worker furloughs and pension cuts, the Fiscal Control Board sued his administration in federal court. It was only after the hurricane did the Fiscal Control Board stop playing hardball and drop their lawsuit. But now the board is back to its old game, now that we have stopped paying attention. The governor, after a few extensions, had his fiscal plan rejected in February because the board, once again, is demanding more cuts to government worker paychecks and their retirements. And his deadline to submit his next plan is next week, March 30th. But as is allowed by the Fiscal Control Board, there is a very real chance that the board is just about the point where it's just going to implement its own plan. And so that's what we're all kind of waiting for now. So now that you know the backstory on what's going on with the Puerto Rican government and their overlords, let's get into their electricity situation. Because media reports are widely reporting that Puerto Rico has between 92% and 99% of the electricity restored. And I don't trust those numbers. I know for a fact the widely reported 99% is a lie. I saw with my own eyes an entire city without electricity. But I also don't trust 92%, the official number, either. And one of the reasons is that the Puerto Rican government has already proven that it is reporting false numbers with one particular number, which I heard locals express anger about repeatedly. The number is 64. That is the official death toll for Puerto Rico for Hurricane Maria. And that number is without a doubt bullshit. In December of 2017, the Center for Investigative Journalism and the New York Times have proven that the death toll is closer to 1,000, and locals think it's even higher than that. Literally discounting their lives like this was highly offensive to the Puerto Ricans that I spoke to about it, as it should be. And so when I drove around the island, especially after the sun went down, and saw so many neighborhoods and condo buildings cloaked in darkness, I simply don't believe the stats. And I know it's anecdotal, but my first day there, our waiter in supposedly all good Luquillo had just gotten electricity back at his home the previous Friday. And then the home I visited, Angela's home in Yubacoa, it hasn't had electricity since the storm. Same story for all of her neighbors whose homes are still there. And by the way, the stats are also saying that 99% of the island has running water, but here's the rub. Angela's house is included in that, but when you turn on the faucet, it's still dry. Why? Because you need electricity to pump the water. So yeah, maybe they are capable of getting water under the right circumstances, but the reality is that there's no water flowing to that house. It shouldn't count, but it does. So I don't know how they're counting who has services and who doesn't, but there are definitely too many people who are living as if the hurricane happened 6 days ago, not 6 months ago. Grocery stores have food and water, but that's as far as their recovery has gone. And so here are some highlights of the last time the Puerto Rican government officials and the Fiscal Control Board members were asked to report to Congress about the electricity situation. Shamefully not since November. But here's Governor Ricardo Rossello, my cutie pie, explaining one of the key problems with the electricity system in Puerto Rico.
We have major, several flaws in terms of the design, aside from having antiquated, power plants. Most of our generation was done in the south, yet most of the people and most of the consumption is done in the north. So you lose about 12 to 15% in the transmission going northward.
So right from the very beginning, that was not an efficient way to set up the electricity system. Most of the people live in the northern part of the island. San Juan is in the north. Where I stayed, Luquillo, in the north. Fajardo, in the north. Where all the rich people are, in Dorado, in the north. There's a lot of people that are living in the north, and then when you drive to the south, it's much less populated, and yet that is where most of the electricity is generated. And so one of the factors that was a problem is that you had to fix these lines that were going through the island, getting the electricity from the south of the island up to the north where all the people are. And so here's a good summary of what was done early in the recovery by PREPA, which is the Public Electricity Corporation in Puerto Rico. This is the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy, Bruce Walker, testifying on November 14th, 2017.
PREPA, with the limited crews that it had, I would point to this map over here, made an early decision to have to tie the southern portion where the generation is to the northern portion where the load is. And in doing so, they made a key decision to construct the 230 kV line from the south, bringing it up to the San Juan area, the Bayamon substation. On the map you can see here, from down here, wrapping up through where that dotted line is, then from up here all the way over to here. What was important about that was that one decision and the efforts made by PREPA with limited staffing enabled the power to be distributed to where the load was. And in conjunction with the other big decision, which is the next slide, Jennifer, the Army Corps, working with PREPA, installed two 25-megawatt generators at the Palo Seco generation plant. And that, in conjunction with the rebuild of the 230 line, enabled power to be distributed to the northern portion to start picking up commercial and residential customers. Those two efforts were monumental given the facts and circumstances. The installation of this generator was with the letting of the contract and the install, and I was at Palo Seco when this was being put in, and the work that had to be done was really incredible. We had fantastic support from PREPA in coordinating it, particularly with the relaying and the coordination with the Army Corps.
Now that's a huge job, and you couldn't see the map, but I could. And where he was pointing to, where they had to run these lines, were locations that would take you at least an hour to drive in a car over a mountain range. So this is a very, very big job. And as you can hear, the nonpartisan people on the ground who actually had to work with PREPA, they don't hate PREPA. Now, that's not to say that PREPA has been amazing. Weird things have gone down. You know, one of the strangest mistakes was an early decision by PREPA, which is a member of the American Public Power Association. Well, as a member of that association, they have the ability to get help from other U.S. utilities, which is a normal thing to do after a hurricane. Instead, PREPA handed out money to private companies to do the electricity restoration job, including a corrupt as contract that was reported widely in the U.S. press to a Montana-based company called Whitefish Energy, which was unqualified for the job and straight up ripped off Puerto Rico with insanely high rates that they charged. For example, they charged $319 an hour for electricity linemen, and the normal salary for linemen is between $60 and $100 an hour, even in emergencies. And so PREPA eventually did request the help of the other public utilities, but not until about 6 weeks after Maria, which was a critical delay. And then there was Warehouse 5. This was weird. In early January of this year, there was a bunch of Army Corps of Engineer officials who were escorted by armed security guards who busted into a warehouse where PREPA was storing supplies, lots of supplies. And they took them and then handed them out to private contractors. And there are conflicting reports about what this was all about. Some articles accused PREPA of hiding these supplies, but other reports proved that the warehouse was known to both the U.S. federal government officials and private contracting companies, including Whitefish. Whitefish had signed out supplies from this warehouse. But regardless, it shows that coordination by PREPA has been weird and bumpy. But despite PREPA's many problems, you just heard that people who have had to work with PREPA on this process have found them to be competent. And PREPA did take on and complete the huge task of getting the energy generation sites in the south connected through a mountain range to San Juan and the other cities in the north. And San Juan in particular, aside from some mangled billboards, largely feels like the hurricane never happened. The lights are on, the air conditioning's blasting, tourists are playing everywhere. San Juan's doing fine. But supplies are apparently low on the island, which is slowing down the power restoration to the places that are not San Juan. And then on top of that, the Army Corps of Engineers is reducing the already too few number of people who are working on the electricity grid in Puerto Rico. And there was a hearing about this in Congress while I was gone. It just happened a few days ago, and so I didn't get a chance to watch it. But I know that this is happening. And while I definitely saw electricity crews working 7 days a week while I was there, I didn't see nearly as many crews working as I would have expected, or at least hoped to see. You know, there were trucks here and there, but there was not the massive mobilization that you would expect in an emergency of this magnitude, especially in still dark Yubacoa. I don't understand why there were so few people working there. And by the way, one of the impressions that I had in my head for why this was taking so long was the topography. Because I've read quite a few times that the power is not restored to these places because the only people that don't have electricity are living in the mountains and their places are tough to get to because there's washed out roads and bridges. And like, that's the reason why they're still living by candlelight. Well, that's bullshit too. Because I was able to drive around with no problems in the darkened neighborhoods of Yubacoa in a piece of shit Nissan Versa. And so the roads are not the problem. The lack of supplies and workers, that's the problem. But the thing about PREPA is that PREPA's problems didn't start with Hurricane Maria. And some of their problems are not even caused by the U.S. Congress or the Fiscal Control Board, but instead by dumb decisions that were made by people who were elected by Puerto Ricans. And so here's an example. Here is Representative Steve Pierce of New Mexico talking to Natalie Jaresko and Noel Zammit, or Zammot. I don't know how to say this boy's name.
Now, one of the problems that I see, just as a former business owner, taking a look at it, one of the reasons that residents had to pay such a high rate is that certain entities didn't have to pay for the electrical power. One of those would be the hotels. So are they still exempt from paying their power?
Each of the economic development plans that Puerto Rico implemented over the years had individual tax agreements with different businesses. I'm just asking about the hotels. Are they still exempt or are they not exempt? Some of them are, yes.
Some of them are exempt.
That's
now, also, cities were also exempt. And so city governments were exempt prior, according to what I've read.
That's correct, sir.
Hotels and all Puerto Rican cities don't pay for their electricity. And so, for example, Aguadilla has a public ice skating facility in a region that hits 80 degrees on a cold day, and they don't pay 1 cent for the power that keeps that rink from turning into a swimming pool. And then when I think back to the hotel I stayed in last year, the Embassy Suites right by the airport, the air conditioning was on full blast in our hotel room before we checked in, and there were no limits on the thermostat on how low it could go, which is pretty standard as I travel around the country. I do like to refrigerate myself when I sleep, and a lot of the hotels just straight up won't let me. And now it makes sense. With no conservation requirement, the cities and many hotels of Puerto Rico have had no incentives to care. Their electricity is legit free, and so they gobble it up with no concerns. Here's another problem that PREPA had, caused by political decisions outside their control, as expressed by the then head of PREPA, Ricardo Ramos, in November.
Many of the fallen poles and fell because of the additional weight of infrastructure that originally was not supposed to be there. So the grid itself is old. Our new design standards account for an amount of additional infrastructure for communications and other. But many of the poles were, they had communications because some local law of Puerto Rico permitted the common right-of-way usage. So we had to allow, telecom companies to put the telecommunications cables there, but the pole itself not necessarily was designed to those standards.
So political and corporate favors to telecom companies granted by the politicians elected by the people of Puerto Rico do bear responsibility for a lot of PREPA's problems. Puerto Ricans are not complete victims here, because you can't blame Congress for those contracts that were created by the local government. And a quick side note here, while we're talking about electricity poles, another thing that pissed me off when reading that AP article about Puerto Rico is that they said that there were dozens of electricity poles that are still standing but will need to be replaced because they're dangerously leaning. In fact, while we were there, it was on a Sunday when most Puerto Ricans are enjoying their lives. There was an elderly couple that was killed when one of these poles fell on them and they died. And I can totally see how that happens because there were a lot of poles that were leaning. Dozens is total bullshit. There were dozens of leaning poles in my neighborhood alone. To make their electricity grid truly safe, they're going to have to replace or reinforce thousands of poles because there were leaners everywhere. They were on major roads, side roads, freeways. They were everywhere. It was unavoidable. I cannot over-exaggerate how many poles we saw that looked like they were gonna fall down if the wind blew. So that was another exaggeration too. This is another example of the situation being worse than we're being told. Dozens of poles, Jesus Christ. But anyway, clearly there were some stupid deals made by the Puerto Rican government. And so here's what Natalie Jaresko, as head of the Fiscal Control Board, plans to do about it.
We have also implemented a contract review policy as a tool to ensure transparency throughout the government for the benefit of the people of Puerto Rico and all stakeholders. The policy applies to all contracts in which the Commonwealth or any covered instrumentality is a counterparty, including those with the federal government, state governments, and private parties. The policy provides that all contracts of $10 million or more must be submitted to the board for its approval before execution. In addition, the board retains the authority to adopt other methods, such as random sampling of contracts below that $10 million threshold, to assure that they promote market competition and are not inconsistent with the approved fiscal plan.
So the board is going to step in and redo the contracts, but in a way that makes sure that they, quote, promote market competition, unquote, which is code for the contracts need to let the profiteers in. Because remember, the PROMESA law said that Puerto Rico's government should, quote, be a facilitator and not a competitor to private enterprise, unquote. And the Oversight Board can require the review of government-to-government contracts that compete with the private sector to, quote, ensure that such proposed contracts promote market competition, unquote. And then, if a contract or rule, regulation, or even executive order fails to comply with the Fiscal Control Board policies, the board is allowed to kill the contracts. And so the law makes it clear that the board, for better or worse, is allowed to do this contract overhaul, and a few moves I would like to see if they're doing it would include making hotels and cities pay for electricity and making the telecoms pay for some of the restoration of the poles that they were using because they put a strain on the system that the system wasn't able to stand during the hurricane. But the law says that the board is allowed to, in fact required to, do this in a way that favors private companies. And so even though it's in the best interest of the Puerto Rican government to make hotels and telecoms pay, is that realistic with that mandate for the board? Because they're not tasked with doing whatever is best for the people of Puerto Rico and therefore the government of Puerto Rico. The board exists to, quote, promote market competition, unquote, and prevent the government from competing with businesses. And I don't like it. I don't think that mandate is what the Puerto Rican people who are lacking basic life-sustaining services like water and power need right now. But the board is legally allowed to prioritize the dream of a free market over those services. They are doing what they're supposed to do by law, which is our Congress's fault. But the board is also doing things for sure that are not so clearly allowed by law. So, for example, in November, this is what Master of the Universe and head of the Fiscal Control Board, Natalie Jaresko, told Congress that they plan to do to PREPA. And just a reminder, Noel Zamot, we're going to finally figure out how people say his name, but this guy is the revitalization coordinator who makes $315,000 a year already to single-handedly determine what infrastructure projects are critical and then fast-track them in the permitting process.
As the committee is aware, the board has recently named Noel Zamot as Chief Transformation Officer of PREPA with all the powers of a CEO and reporting to the board. We believe this is absolutely essential, both to restoring service as soon as possible and to creating a sustainable, efficient, resilient, and fiscally accountable power system for the island. While the board is confident that PROMESA, coupled with fundamental aspects of bankruptcy law, gives us the power and responsibility to do as we have done, some parties are vigorously contesting our authority in proceedings before the Title III judge. To avoid uncertainty and lengthy delays in litigation, congressional reaffirmation of our exercise of our authority is welcome.
Noel Zamot. Here I thought I was messing up his last name the whole time. It turns out I was screwing up his first name. Well, here's what Noel Zamot planned to do with his extra power as essentially the CEO of the monopoly power company on the island.
I will retain key leaders on my staff to enable speed and effectiveness in our decision-making. I'd like to highlight two key roles. The Chief Operations Officer will be responsible for day-to-day operations of the utility. This will initially be a senior leader from within PREPA, but will be augmented by an industry executive identified in conjunction with input that we are receiving from the Edison Electric Institute,
which is the lobbying organization that represents all United States private investor-owned electric companies, which funded a campaign for years to fight the expansion of solar power.
I've also identified key executives to serve on a board of advisors. These are CEOs from public and private utilities who have generously volunteered to bring their considerable expertise to help with this task. I'll also rely on an internal group of world-class experts from multinational utilities, the energy sector, academia, and more.
So I will staff my new electricity company with people from the private sector and the private sector and the private sector and the private sector. But is the board allowed to even do this, to have one of their own literally take over PREPA? Well, this was a question that was asked by Puerto Rico's resident commissioner, because she's definitely not a representative, but this is the person that Puerto Rico has sent to Congress to basically speak for them in Congress, even though she's not allowed to vote. And she is asking questions of Natalie Jaresko.
You said that the board have the power to name a chief transformation officer to take over the management of PREPA. And at the same time, I know the state government, the state legislature, the governor is against that, and you file a motion in the court to allow that to happen. Do you have the power, or you don't have the power to actually name the coordinator board?
Thank you. We believe we do have that power, and that's why we filed that petition in court. We believe we have that power under Title III as any representative of a debtor, and the board is named the representative of the debtor in the Title III in the law in PROMESA to name a chief restructuring officer, a receiver, a chief transformation officer, as we call it.
Sorry to interrupt you, but then you don't need any change in the PROMESA law? You don't need any power to make that happen? Because that's the question this committee is doing. What do you need in terms of helping the people of Puerto Rico to recover power? I think that's the main question. If we were a state, we will not have you. If we were a state, we will have full funding in all federal programs. And now that's the problem all territories got.
The board believes that appointing a CTO will help us move more quickly to restoration of power. That is the only reason the board took this position, and it took it at this time.
Yeah, because what makes a company more efficient is firing everyone at the top and replacing them completely in the middle of a job that's not done. But anyway, just 1 week later, Natalie Jaresko was back in front of Congress with this news that she gave on November 14th to the Senate.
So as you know, Madam Chairman, the board took an action and filed in the Title III court to name a chief transformation officer. The court ruled yesterday against us in that action, although we have not yet seen the written judgment, so I can't comment on it in detail.
So the Fiscal Control Board is definitely, without a doubt, trying to exercise power that they don't have by law. We know it for sure. The courts have said so. But that didn't really slow them down much, because on the 6-month anniversary of the hurricane on March 20th, the temporary head of PREPA announced that a new guy will be taking over. His name is Walter Higgins III. And Walter Higgins III is currently the head of South Jersey Gas Company, was previously the chairman, president, and CEO of AGL Resources, another gas company, and was previously on the board of the American Gas Association and the Edison Electric Institute, which is the lobbying organization for all U.S. private utilities, which was central to Noel Zimot's plan as well. And so the lobbying organization for private electricity companies is clearly at the center of all this, which is not surprising, I guess, as we know that the privatization of PREPA was always the plan. Now, officially, the plan in PROMESA, in the law, was to privatize the generation of electricity, while PREPA was, in theory, supposed to keep the transmission, the delivery side of the business. But Noel Zimot let it slip that the Fiscal Control Board had more ambitious plans.
Puerto Rico's energy strategy calls for 50% renewables by 2040, with a balance of natural and LP gas mix, regional grids with generation close to demand, physical hardening and control systems to provide resiliency, and widespread distributed generation, all wrapped by an empowered and accountable energy regulator. PROMESA is clear in its guidance to attract private capital to achieve this end state. We need to do just that, not only for generation, but to attract innovative capital solutions from the private sector for transmission and distribution as well.
And after being called out on that transmission and distribution were possibly being sold off too, Natalie Jaresko told Congress this.
The board certainly considers privatization as one of the options going forward. There's a question that remains open to see whether it's privatization of the entire power sector, meaning generation, transmission, and distribution, or some select part, or whether it just means bringing in private sector to compete and bring down the cost and bring up the efficiency of electricity. We're looking at all of those as we define this fiscal plan for PREPA.
Right. You know, she presented this all as a maybe. But on January 22nd, 2018, about 2 months after this hearing, Governor Cutie Pie Rosello announced that he intends to sell PREPA in its entirety to the private sector by the middle of 2019, which is a fire sale, despite the fact that PREPA is one of the few parts of the Puerto Rican government that consistently brings in revenue which would be much higher if all of their customers were required to, pay. Then the Fiscal Control Board announced in February, a month after the PREPA privatization was announced, that it was going to pay Citigroup Global Markets Incorporated to be the main investment bank coordinating the fire sale of PREPA's assets along with the Fiscal Control Board. It's another service that the Puerto Ricans will be paying for, even though Citigroup in particular was directly responsible for creating many of the predatory loans with high interest rates that put PREPA $9 billion into debt, collecting fees in the process. They will be directly profiting from dismantling a public system that they were directly involved in destroying. But the privatization news pleased the investors holding the $9 billion in debt who only care about cashing in on their investment bets. Because shareholder gamblers getting paid is the main goal in all of this. They want to sell off the electricity company and turn the cash over to the bankers. And exhibiting that dynamic well is a powerful member of Congress, chairman of the House Natural Resources Committee, Rob Bishop. He is demanding that the bankers be central to creating the privatization plans. He said, quote, "It is imperative that the oversight board and governor fully integrate those who hold the debt into the development of these plans, thereby guaranteeing accuracy and transparency in the underlying assumptions. After all, the board's stated goal under PROMESA is to return Puerto Rico to fiscal accountability and capital markets, and this can only occur if the fiscal plans respect the lawful priorities and liens of debt holders," unquote. Who are the bankers? Who are the investors? Who are the shareholders? They're the people who are charging 34% interest. These are the people who are being prioritized, not my friends on the ground in Puerto Rico. Because I personally don't give a if the bankers ever get paid, or if people like you and I take a hit in our mutual funds, because we're gambling too. Even if it's gambling with our retirements, it's still gambling. And that's what happens when you gamble, when you invest. Sometimes you lose. I am concerned about the citizens of Puerto Rico, and I am concerned about what this privatization plan might mean for them. Because privatizing the electricity on the island takes away even more decision-making power from the Puerto Rican people, as the private companies that buy the pieces of Puerto Rico's power grid in the fire sale would not have any line of accountability to the Puerto Ricans. What is an unsatisfied customer of their services supposed to do? Take their business elsewhere? That's impossible. It's a monopoly. And it's also impossible to vote out the private executives, because the Puerto Rican people will be stuck with whatever these companies decide. And remember, PREPA, as a public corporation, is mandated with providing electricity service to the Puerto Rican people. But private companies' goals are to provide profits to the gamblers, to the shareholders who bet on their companies in the Wall Street casino. Their jobs in the private sector is to keep labor costs, paychecks low. Their jobs are to construct the infrastructure as cheaply as possible so that more money can go to the shareholders. Their jobs is to siphon as much money as is tolerable out of the customers to pass as much money as possible into their shareholders' pockets. Those priorities are different, and those differences are huge. And Puerto Rico has already experimented with privatizing their essential services in the past, and it was a total failure. Because in the 1990s, for example, Cutie Pie's dad, then Governor Pedro Rosello, sold their water system to two of the world's largest water corporations, first Viola and then Suez, by declaring a state of emergency for essentially the same reasons the government is selling off the electricity system now. The infrastructure was bad, and they wanted private money to rain down upon the island to fix it. Well, that's not what happened. Instead, the private companies cut corners in construction and maintenance of infrastructure, which is not surprising because that maximizes return to shareholders. They also increased prices for Puerto Rican customers and billed Puerto Ricans for water they didn't even use, which are good business decisions that maximize returns to shareholders. The company also cut corners in environmental protections, dumping raw sewage into water sources instead of disposing it properly, which maximized returns to their shareholders, at least until they got fined by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. After trying again with another multinational water company, Puerto Rico's Public Water Corporation ended up resuming responsibility for the water system once again because this clearly wasn't working out for the Puerto Rican people, except only now the infrastructure was even worse than before and hundreds of millions of dollars had been wasted, much of that money going into the private pockets via fees and shareholder siphoning. So privatization of essential services didn't work in a real-life, recent example on the same exact island under very similar circumstances. But the child of the guy who made that cluster happen has learned nothing and is taking the island down the same road with electricity. And to make matters worse, at the same time that Puerto Rico's governor will be selling off parts of Puerto Rico's electricity system, he is also dismantling the only part of Puerto Rico's government that could hold these private companies accountable, the Puerto Rico Energy Commission. He's doing this by making it smaller. It's only going to have 3 people on it, and then he's going to overload it with work by giving it responsibility overseeing many more industries. He also announced plans to get rid of the Independent Office of Consumer Protection, which is the only office with real power that the customers, the people of Puerto Rico, could go to with complaints about their electricity service. The plan seems to be a page out of the Free Market Utopia Handbook, the one that was written by the IMF, which allows private companies to police themselves during their quest to siphon out as much money as possible from Puerto Rico's electricity system to stuff in shareholders' private pockets. So frustrating to watch. And so we know that the Fiscal Control Board is using the hurricane to expedite the privatization of PREPA that they always intended to complete, even if they were pretending that it was a maybe for a while. We also know that in this process, the Fiscal Control Board has been proven to be exercising powers that it does not have. But just as concerning, if not more so, are the things that the board is doing with the power it actually does have. And a great example of that is the Arecibo trash incinerator project. Because remember that guy, Noel Zamot, who they wanted to anoint the CEO of PREPA? Well, he's still the revitalization coordinator, and he has the power to deem any infrastructure project that he wants as critical. And that gets the project to basically get around permitting. And so he did that for a project that has been in the works since 2012. The project in question here is a trash incinerator that would be located a few miles inland from Arecibo, which is a city of approximately 90,000 residents on the north side of the island, at the site of a long ago abandoned and fully destroyed paper mill. In fact, if you want to see the paper mill, this episode's cover art is a picture that Joe took because him and I, we drove out there to see the site for ourselves. But anyway, the proposal is to build a trash incinerator that would burn approximately 2,300 tons of trash per day on a site on a wetland that, like I said, Joe and I went out to see it. Now, this incinerator would be a direct combustion system where the metal would be separated out and the exhaust from the burning of trash would be somehow treated. And then the ash would be taken to landfills. Now, Puerto Rico definitely has a trash problem because recycling bins are absurdly difficult to find. And well, I'm just going to say it. The Puerto Rican people have a littering habit that I found infuriating on both of my trips to the island. And so right now, when Puerto Ricans do bother to pick up their trash, it gets taken to a few dozen landfills, many of which are already full and not in compliance with EPA standards. And with the amount of debris that still needs to be cleared from Maria, there is a lot of trash with nowhere to go. And then clearly they have an electricity problem. And so if this incinerator were to actually be built, it could generate approximately 2% of the island's power needs. That's what the environmental impact statement said. And that's about half of what the renewables are generating right now. But the idea here is to kill two birds with one stone, generate some electricity while eliminating trash. And opinions about whether this incinerator is a good idea vary widely, even in my own home. Joe, my solar engineer husband, thinks it's a good idea, even though he acknowledges that he wouldn't want it in his backyard. And like I said, we went there. It's not far from people's backyards. But him and I were talking about it over email, and he likes it because the proposed site is in an already toxic location right next to an existing fossil fuel plant. So from his engineering eyeballs, he says that this location is good because it makes hooking into the existing transmission lines really easy. So Joe's bottom line was, quote, an incinerator is not the cleanest form of power production, but it seems to be better than oil or gas, which is the majority of power production on the island. Plus, you saw what happened to that solar farm and those windmills, unquote. And what he's referring to there is that we saw a solar farm and some windmills that were demolished. Now, this was really close to Yubacoa. I mean, this area was one of the hardest hit. But the windmills that we saw were still standing, but the blades were splintered like popsicle sticks. And then the solar farm was just a giant field of twisted metal. It was not a good scene. But back to Joe's conclusion, he said, quote, I get why the locals don't want it, but if they don't build it, then they need to figure out another solution for their dumps or start recycling, unquote. Which would be my preferred action plan here, since the Puerto Rican recycling program is still essentially non-existent. But there's also the locals who have to breathe the air filled with particulates from trash burning, who have been protesting the incinerator now for 5 years. In fact, at the proposed site, it's covered with protest signs, and there's a tent, like one of those big ones that you would bring to like a tailgate. But that is set up and it has a bunch of chairs under it, which indicates to me that if we were to go there on a day that wasn't a Sunday, there's a very good chance that those are seats that are for local protesters who camp out there on a regular basis. And so here are some of their concerns. The following clip is Representative Grace Napolitano of California talking to Noel Zamot, the guy who is fast-tracking this project.
The incinerator would be built in an area, Arecibo, previously contaminated by a battery recycling plant. and it was flooded during the hurricanes. Has the area been tested for lead, arsenic, and other contaminants?
Ma'am, I do not have specific details on what work has been accomplished to date, but we do know that the company that is planning that work has done extensive mitigation pre-work.
How long has then plant been there that it hasn't been tested?
Ma'am, I do not have that information.
Would you mind sending the answers to this committee?
Yes, ma'am.
So we can understand that. And how does the Energy Answers Arecibo LLC plan to prevent their landfill from being flooded by future hurricanes?
Ma'am, could you repeat the question?
How do you prevent landfill from being flooded by hurricanes?
That is an engineering question that I'm not prepared to answer right now. I would imagine that that has been looked at in the permitting that the company has received to date.
Okay, when and how and where does the company plan to bury the toxic ashes generated by the incinerator?
That is being currently discussed with the current Puerto Rico administration.
Let's see, how many Puerto Rico municipalities refuse to send trash to the plant incinerator?
I think the answer to that is many, because that represents a threat to current waste management in Puerto Rico, which the EPA has identified as a critical need to address.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of things that are critically needed to be addressed, because those are some serious environmental questions that this guy, who is personally responsible for designating this project as critical and is fast-tracking the permits, he doesn't know some pretty important stuff. But, this is less about the incinerator itself than the process that's being used right now to construct it. The process created by Congress that allows the Fiscal Control Board, specifically the Revitalization Coordinator, Noel Zamat, to expedite critical projects, which the Fiscal Control Board is designating the trash incinerator to be. Because one of the special powers the Fiscal Control Board was given by Congress was the ability to waive any local or federal law that would adversely impact the expedited permitting process. And some in Congress are concerned about how this is working out in real life. This is Representative Raul Grijalva of Arizona talking to the same people you've been hearing from the whole day.
Do you or the board hold a view that relative to Title V, waiving or eliminating additional federal environmental safeguards like NEPA or regulations will accelerate the recovery in Puerto Rico? If Mr. Jaresco, you, and then Mr. Zamat, if you don't mind as well, answering the question.
I certainly believe that further expeditious permitting is a requirement. I'm not an expert on the individual sets of permitting, but I want to underline that it's both federal, Commonwealth, and municipality permitting at all levels. It needs to be expedited for any private sector investment to become a quick recovery.
Mr. Zamat, do you think that's needed?
Thank you, sir. My view is that economic growth and fast-tracking projects is not inconsistent with being good stewards of the environment. And we have a very robust process within Title V and within the working group that we have set with the government to ensure that we, the residents of Puerto Rico, are very respectful of that.
If I may, sir, let me just follow up with you. You cite the proposed trash incinerator as an example of a project, Title V, that could come to fruition. But I see an example of why Title V in this instance doesn't work. Public comments about the project are overwhelming in opposition. It's opposed by both mayors' groups representing all the mayors in the island. It was stalled in part because it couldn't get a permit to drain 2.1 million gallons from a protected wetland. Farmers and residents concerned about the effects on their health, that it could undermine recycling programs that are in place. It flooded during the hurricane. We have a before and after situation that's up on the screen. It flooded during and released some of the hundreds of tons of toxic ash that could release in the future toxic ash into the surrounding neighborhoods. And it requires a major loan from the federal government to go forward, even though it's fully privately funded, for 67 megawatts of power. Is that what we can expect in terms of Title V critical projects?
Sir, there are many voices that obviously in a democratic process voiced their concern with such a project, but there are equal number of voices on the positive side. We don't look at this project in Arecibo necessarily as even a power project. It is really a waste management project. Puerto Rico has a critical, essentially a crisis in waste management and landfill use that has been identified by the EPA, and that is why the EPA has actually been supportive of this program.
And there was an environmental impact statement that was issued by the EPA, which I've included for you in the show notes. And the EPA issued a final permit for the project in December 2014. So that's not bullshit. But the locals, the people that live there, have been able to put the project on hold. And with this process, with the expedited construction process dictated by the unelected Fiscal Control Board, they've been taken completely out of the process. Because here is the financial situation of the incinerator project. This is Representative Doug Lamborn of California talking to Noel Zamat.
And the last thing I want to ask you about is that $800 million project, and the ranking member referred to it burning waste to create electricity. Is my understanding that that would be privately funded and would not need government subsidies of any kind?
That is correct, sir. It's entirely privately funded. Some of the capital structure includes some federal loans, but there is no money from Puerto Rico, and it relies on relatively new technology that is really respectful of emissions.
So there you go. It's a private sector project, which explains the enthusiasm, but it needs federal loans, and the loans in question have some rules. So here's Representative Luis Gutierrez of Illinois once again talking to Noel Zamat.
Arecibo Incinerator, Mrs. Samant, I would hope you would talk to Secretary Vilsack, because you seem to have a different perspective than he does, since the loan from the USDA is through the Rural Utility Services. In other words, the money is not in order to do something with waste management. The money is to create energy. But you said to us earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I misunderstood, that the purpose is one of for garbage, basically, disposal, and not for energy. How do you see it? Is it garbage disposal or energy? What is the primary purpose of it?
Sir, the government of Puerto Rico has a letter out, and they consider that plant in Arecibo to be both a provider of energy.
You said primarily. You said primarily.
The plant at Arecibo will provide about 2% of the aggregate electrical demand.
Okay, so primarily, I heard you, and we can go back to the record. You said that it was primarily, yet they are asking for a loan between $500,000 and $750 million. And let me just assure you and everybody here, given the fact that the government of Puerto Rico already owes over $2 billion, unless Mrs. Jareska is going to use some of her skills to eliminate that debt, I don't see how we're going to do that. And in the last 25 seconds, because I want to focus on this issue with you. Do you believe that the control board has such power that you do not have to take into consideration the concerns of the duly elected mayors of the cities that will be affected by the incinerator, or do you feel you need to consult with them before you make a decision going forward?
Sir, in 9 seconds, the statute provides for a public comment period that in conclusion.
So you don't believe, you do believe that you're supreme, you're kind of a dictator over everything.
And I think that's a fair way to describe what is happening here, because the people of Puerto Rico call the Fiscal Control Board the junta, which is not a term of endearment. And this is one of the reasons. This project, no matter how you feel about it, is being pushed through despite the protests of people who actually live there, using the extraordinary power granted to an unelected board made up of corporate hacks and no Puerto Ricans. And their public comment period is a fucking joke, considering that it's pretty hard to submit internet comments when you don't have electricity. And this board, which clearly, at least in my opinion, is far more powerful than it should be, is telling the Congress that created it that it wants even more power over the future of Puerto Rico. Here's Representative Garrett Graves of Louisiana talking to Natalie Jaresko.
The governor recently proposed a law to address emergencies and disasters. Part of that law would allow basically eliminating or waiving sales tax in Puerto Rico. Are you aware, is that proposal on your radar screen? Were you consulted?
No, we were not consulted, and I am aware that there has been a problem because of the lack of electricity in the collections of the sales and use tax. However, as electricity comes back, the collection process should also return.
So you were not consulted, you were not aware on the front end. If ultimately the governor certifies that this is in compliance with the fiscal plan and you determine otherwise, what happens then? How does that play out?
Well, I would hope that they would consult prior to putting that policy in place, because it is something that can have a direct adverse fiscal effect, and it could be not in compliance with the fiscal plan. If they certify that it is, as you described, then we have a situation which could potentially, again, lead to difference of opinion in terms of what our role is in PROMESA. And it is very difficult for us, once it is certified by the government as being in compliance, if we disagree, to reverse that.
I'm sorry, so you say that last part again? Quick.
If the government certifies that the executive order or law is in compliance with the fiscal plan, it is difficult for us.
Your hands are effectively tied. Do you think Congress should revisit that in terms of something that you believe causes economic harm or undermines the objectives of the fiscal plan, but you don't have the ability to actually help reset that?
I think it should be very clear that the intent of PROMESA was for us to be able to stop things that were having an adverse effect on the fiscal plan, yes.
And at least some in Congress are more than willing to help the board get even more dictatorial. Here's Representative Raul Labrador of Idaho.
You stated that prior to the hurricane, the board possessed the authority to execute its mission and deliver on the underlying mandate Congress set with PROMESA, but with the devastation, you allude that those tools may be inadequate. So please tell us, does the board currently have the tools necessary to facilitate efficient and effective recovery?
I will try to be clear. I believe the board has the tools, and PROMESA gives us the tools. That said, when there are disagreements, the use of those tools ends up in costly and time-consuming litigation. Today, more than ever, that time and that cost is not helping Puerto Rico. So we asked for clarity of the tools that we have, whether it is in the appointment of a CTO through Title III, whether it is the implementation of our contract policy review, or whether or not it is the implementation of the fiscal plans in full when certified.
So what else do you need to be successful? Is there anything else that we need to give you to be successful?
I think we would appreciate a legislative affirmation of those and or conditioning of appropriations on those powers as you see fit.
And the main problem with all of this is that Puerto Rico is at a crossroads right now. The decisions that are being made are going to shape the future of Puerto Rico. And there's a strong possibility that the desires of the Fiscal Control Board, with a mandate to create market competition, are not going to match the desires of the real Puerto Ricans. Keeping in mind that he is definitely a corporate hack, here's Governor Cutie Pie Ricardo Rossello telling Congress what he is envisioning for Puerto Rico, which, despite his many flaws, and I wouldn't vote for this guy based on what I've seen, but despite his flaws, he is a real Puerto Rican. And I don't doubt that he cares about the living conditions on the island he calls home.
We have several flaws in terms of the design, aside from having antiquated, power plants. Most of our generation was done in the south, yet most of the people and most of the consumption is done in the north. So you lose about 12 to 15% in the transmission going northward. It is time, it is an opportunity to rethink that. Where do we have that generation and make it better? Piggybacking on Senator Cassidy's comments, I think it is an opportunity also to leapfrog in renewables. I've envisioned, us leapfrogging to 25% renewables in Puerto Rico, and recognizing that there are, some mitigation strategies that we need to put in place. That is why we have worked with the PREPA Governing Board to have a group of thought leaders that can actually help us in the design and looking forward, and specifically looking where this could happen. Last mile events in Puerto Rico are very important, and it's important to consider the terrain. Puerto Rico is not flat. It's got a mountainous region. And so, we will be very aggressively pursuing that we get to 95% of energy consumption and energy generation. But that last mile always takes more time because there are sort of remote areas of the island. This is an opportunity to make microgrids in Puerto Rico so that they can be sustained in different areas. And lastly, adding to this whole component of renewables, I think it is an opportunity to look at this from a bottom-up and a top-down approach. With the collaboration of FEMA, we were able to, for the first time in the STEP program, allow that either a power plant generator be added to the house, or a renewable battery pack solar combo be added to those homes in the STEP program. Now, we expect that there will be about 80,000 homes that will be introduced in the STEP program. Think about what that means if half of them decide to go with the renewable battery pack route. It means that now you have the starting conditions to actually think about things like a virtual power plant in Puerto Rico, where you can have smart distribution of the energy, and where, some days it might be cloudy in some areas in Puerto Rico. It'll be sunny, certainly, in others as well. And that energy can be distributed alongside, of course, a complement of utility size and industrial size generation, which I envision, Senator, should start transitioning from petroleum-based generation, which is costly and of course, more harmful, to gas, liquid gas, and so forth generation. So those are, in a nutshell, what we envision the sort of future grid of Puerto Rico looking like.
So he envisions a future with much more renewable generation, which makes so much sense. It's sunny there, especially on the south side of the island, damn near every day. And the wind blows every day. There would be no fossil fuel importation costs, and so funds that would otherwise be spent on carbon to burn could be set aside for panel and turbine replacements in case of storms. And I'm sure as technology advances, the wind and solar systems will just get better and more sturdy. But we know that the Edison Electric Institute fought for years against renewable energy, specifically solar power. The private utility companies like the business model that keeps us dependent on them for generation. They don't want us making our own power on our own roofs. They are deeply embedded in the Fiscal Control Board plans. Also, the board doesn't want a more localized, sustainable electricity system for Puerto Rico because that will make it harder for bankers to get their money back. Because the goal of the Fiscal Control Board is to get electric rates down so the debt can be repaid to investors. Natalie Jaresko, she didn't say it in this hearing, she said it in an article, but she said it would be a problem to have people moving off the grid because, quote, the ability to pay back the banks with interest becomes even more of a challenge, unquote. And then there's LNG, liquefied natural gas. As you heard the governor mention, a part of the plan for Puerto Rico is a heavier reliance on natural gas, despite the fact that there is none on the island naturally and it needs to be imported. Well, here's a congressman from Frackingville, Colorado, Representative Doug Lamborn, discussing the future he envisions for Puerto Rico, which matters because he has infinitely more power over determining that future than any Puerto Rican, including the governor.
Is it safe in assuming that pretty much 100% of the electricity generated in Puerto Rico today is from burning fueled oil?
Sure, yeah, I would say it's 96%. There is approximately 4% that is renewables in Puerto Rico right now.
And as we know, fuel oil is very expensive and very dirty.
That is correct, sir.
So I like the plan. I think you said by 2040, 50% renewables, 50% natural gas through liquefied form. Have you identified investors who are willing to make that huge investment in a LNG terminal?
Sir, there are a number of investors that are actually very bullish on Puerto Rico's long-term prospects, and we in the board, and specifically in my role as revitalization coordinator, we receive a lot of proposals, a lot of questions about how people can bring innovative capital solutions using private capital to bear to benefit the reconstruction of the grid and the people of Puerto Rico.
Well, I would really urge you to keep pushing in that direction because I don't think nuclear or coal is going to be a solution. Renewables are great, but to provide that much electricity in that short a time is unrealistic. So I welcome the discussion about LNG.
So there are a lot of forces pushing for different things in Puerto Rico. But the fact that the Fiscal Control Board is working with an organization that has been proven to be hostile to renewables, the fact that the executive branch, controlled by the Trump administration, is hopelessly devoted to fossil fuels, and the fact that Puerto Ricans really don't have a role in any of these decisions, I have concerns. I think there is a real possibility that multinational fossil fuel companies and their private utility company partners are going to use the Fiscal Control Board to rebuild the infrastructure around gas, which will make money for multinational fossil fuel companies and the private utilities who will have an island full of dependent customers for decades to come. That's what I'm worried about. And that's what I'll be watching for when our lazy excuses for Congress members bother to bring the Fiscal Control Board back for more half-assed oversight. But it's not all bad news for Puerto Rico, thank God. as the law I read for the last episode, the 5th continuing resolution of this Congress, well, it included some provisions for Puerto Rico specifically, which will make a real difference. One of them has to do with the Stafford Act. And so here's the situation. In this clip, you're going to first hear from Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of That's Nevada. NV is Nevada. I'm like, North Vermont. But anyway, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, followed by Assistant Secretary of the Department of Energy, Bruce Walker. Then it'll be Governor Cutie Pie. And then you're going to hear from the governor of the Virgin Islands, Kenneth Mapp. They kind of go back and forth, so just roll with it. You'll be fine.
My understanding under the Stafford Act, it's Section 406E, that limits the use of federal disaster relief funds for repairing, restoring, reconstructing, or replacing a public facility or private nonprofit facility on the basis of the design of the facility as the facility existed immediately before the major disaster. Now, my understanding of that then is that all of the talk that I've heard today, which is important talk about new infrastructure, burying lines, looking at how we add renewable capacity, that is something that is not going to be addressed through the funding, through the relief that comes from the federal government. Is that correct? And I guess I'm asking Mr. Walker and General Jackson, is that your understanding?
That is my understanding. As I mentioned earlier, we're doing emergency restoration work now. A number of the things that have been mentioned here, if the Congress approves additional appropriations, those would be opportunities that we could further, build into.
Are you asking today then, that's what you're asking Congress today, additional appropriations outside of the Stafford Act, be able to set up new infrastructure and do just what we've heard today? Because we know another hurricane is going to come through or some other disaster. It's just, I think it's just the way the climate is today. Is that the ask today from the governors?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure. So the Stafford Act limits the amount of money that you're getting from the federal government for disaster relief to repair and reconstruct. It is not for new construction or new types of renewable energy or burying lines. So are you coming today for additional funds outside of the Stafford Act, outside of disaster relief? Is that what I'm hearing today?
Yes, because under Stafford, if a system connected to the power generation isn't damaged, it can't be touched. If it's cost effective, it can be mitigated, but the whole power system is all connected. And so if we want to change to more efficient renewables, wind, solar, if the generation system hasn't been damaged, then we can have an exclusion. So we will need changes in the language to permit that.
Yes, we recognize what the limitations of FEMA funding are within this. So we're asking, for additional funding so that we can get that flexibility as well and actually rebuild better. I mean, again, it is. You can discuss whether it's a good idea or not on the context of the merit of the energy and the structure, but it is really just a bad idea to rebuild a system that is frail over again. Spend good taxpayer money in that because you're going to have to do it once over again.
And so the good news I have for you is that the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018, which was a part of that continuing resolution I read for the last episode, it waives the Stafford Act for replacing critical services on Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, which are related to the 2017 hurricanes, which is unquestionably the electric grid. So Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands definitely have the opportunity right now to use the money that we are giving them, our tax money, to make better decisions if the Fiscal Control Board lets them, for how they rebuild their grids. And so, when I'm saying that these decisions are so key, none of these are hypotheticals anymore. The decisions being made right now are shaping the future of not only Puerto Rico, but also the Virgin Islands. And so here's how much Governor Cutie Pie thinks that Puerto Rico needs just for their new electricity system.
Based on your estimates, how much are you asking Congress to fund in terms of the kind of modernization, resilience, et cetera, that you would like to see in Puerto Rico?
It's about $17 billion in damage estimation.
1 year?
For the bulk of
$17 billion?
Yes, that's right.
And is it I know that you hope that Congress will authorize that, and do you expect that authorization or that funding to occur in 1 year, or is it over a period of time?
No, it would be over a period of time, of course.
And so to put that into some context, the government is in the process of being funded. Actually, it was just funded this morning. I'm recording this on a Friday the 23rd, and this is the day that the continuing resolution ran out. So the government is now funded. And I know that the Defense Department was given an extra $80 billion just for more war things for just this year alone. And when I say this year, they have to spend that by September 30th. So if we have 80 billion just for like war things, 17 billion to provide electricity to our citizens, like, yeah, I think we can afford that. And I personally am happy to pay taxes to help this grid become a reality, even though I don't live in Puerto Rico. But here's the part that pisses me off. I don't want my taxes to pay for a new grid that will then be sold and profited from by some damn investor-owned utility. If I pay for it, I want my fellow American citizens to own it. I want its purpose to be to provide them electricity as cheap as possible every day forever. I do not want the purpose to be to funnel as much money as possible into the pockets of shareholders. Yet that appears to be where we're headed. Because the February 8th continuing resolution law did give Puerto Rico some money. So first of all, one of the sections gave $15 billion to the Army Corps of Engineers to repair damages caused by the 2017 natural disasters. $10 billion of that has to be specifically for the hurricane areas. Now, these are for all three hurricanes, Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So that's going to be split up, and I don't exactly know how, but some of that money will make it to Puerto Rico. However, there's another provision that provides $11 billion that has to be spent on areas hit by Hurricane Maria. I think a lot of that will end up in Puerto Rico, and $2 billion of that has to be spent on upgrades to the electrical power systems. So billions are coming to the islands. It's definitely not all Puerto Rico needs for electricity. Puerto Rico alone, you just heard it, they need $17 billion, but it's a start. What I think is up to us is to make sure that it's not the end, because they do need to rebuild this electricity grid. And I don't know what we do about the privatization. I don't know if there's anything we can do. And even though I know I need to wrap this up now, this is such a long episode, but there's so much more happening in Puerto Rico. It's not just electricity. So for instance, when I was there was a teacher walkout because hundreds of public schools have already been closed, and there's a plan that's going to close 300 more by 2022. And then while I was there was an education reform law that was passed by the Puerto Rican Congress. And this law is now opening the door to charter schools. And so charter schools, which are going to be renamed public alliance schools, are going to be allowed to take over 10% of the school system, which is just like how they privatized or charter schools aren't exactly fully private. What they are is they're public schools, so funded by our taxes, but they are managed for a profit. So charter schools are going to be able to take over 10% of the Puerto Rican school system. This is exactly what happened in New Orleans after Katrina. And then also 3% of students in Puerto Rico will be allowed to be put on a voucher system, which was a system that was declared unconstitutional when they tried to do this in Puerto Rico 20 years ago. And so after this passed the Puerto Rican Congress, the teachers walked out. And it was the Monday that I was there. Now, this is a ballsy move on the part of the people of Puerto Rico, and I think that this is just the beginning. But the PROMESA law prohibits strikes. And so the Fiscal Oversight Board, in addition to all of their other extraordinary powers, is also charged with ensuring prompt enforcement of any territorial laws, quote, prohibiting public sector employees from participating in a strike or lockout, unquote. Then on top of that, on the 6-month anniversary of Maria, Governor Cutie Pie announced his plans to kill 83 law enforcement agencies in the Puerto Rican Justice and Agriculture departments, reducing their enforcement agencies from 188 of them to just 35. Now, I'm sure some of them are like not needed, but that's an enormous cut to government. He also plans to eliminate 8,000 government jobs over the next 5 years. So sorry, people of Puerto Rico, that's less paychecks for you. And part of his plan is also a new voluntary transition program is what they're calling it. And this is a program that gives money to public sector employees to either retire early or get jobs in the corporate or nonprofit sector. Like, why? Why? A job is a job. They get paychecks regardless. This guy is dismantling the Puerto Rican government is what I'm trying to tell you, because there's also a plan to reduce regulators seeing all kinds of industries to, like I said before, a 3-member panel. And that means that businesses, including the businesses that will be purchasing the pieces of Puerto Rican electricity, they'll get to operate with as little law enforcement oversight as possible. So free market, baby, giving businesses the freedom to do whatever they want. And these policies are designed as I have said so many times, to maximize profits for industry, despite the negative consequences for the population. And they're being rushed into law as fast as possible while the people of Puerto Rico are still concerned about whether or not their lights will work. Because even in the places considered back to normal, they're not back to normal. The power's still going out. You know, I met a restaurant owner in Fajardo, in the most touristy of locations, who told us about how he had to close his restaurant the previous Saturday because the power was out from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. And so he had to shuttle all the fish and other perishables that were in his restaurant fridge back and forth to his home in order to not lose them all. And so I asked how his business was doing overall, and he said that Sundays, which is the days that the Puerto Rican locals go out on the town, well, Sundays are really keeping him afloat. And so on our last day in Puerto Rico, the day of the teacher strike, that Monday, I went back to his restaurant because my food was so damn good, I wanted it again. And we found out that the day before, Sunday, his busiest day, the restaurant was closed again because there was no electricity. And so people in Puerto Rico were busy. The lucky ones with power and water also have the fear of it going out in the back of their minds all the time. They also have loved ones in other parts of the island that are still in the dark all the time. The emergency has not ended, which is why the speed of these governmental changes is so sinister. This is classic shock doctrine, classic World Trade System. Corporate-friendly, worker and customer-harming policies are becoming law while the people are not prepared to fight back. No matter what you think about the policies, because I know some of you really think that the market should be free to do whatever the hell it pleases, but even if you think that, I think we can all agree that this process is wrong. The Fiscal Control Board, none of us would be okay with this in our own hometowns. In the United States, one of the things taught to us in elementary school, the thing that made us special, is that we, the citizens, get to control our government. And that's not happening in Puerto Rico. Choices are being made for them, led by some lady from Chicago/Ukraine. It's wrong. And so few of us even know that it's happening. And you know, I'm really giving up on the idea that my work, this podcast, is ever going to change a goddamn thing. I don't really know what to do for Puerto Rico other than to raise awareness about their situation, which I'm hoping this episode will do, even on the teeny tiny scale that it's capable of. And I'm personally going to keep an eye on Congress and call my Congress members to tell them that I'm not okay with granting the junta more powers. But to anyone listening to me right now in Puerto Rico, just know that at least I'm with you. And thank you, Angela, for showing Joe, Ryan, and I a small piece of your world. And I don't know when I'm going to be able to make it back to the island, but please, my local Puerto Rican friends, keep me updated on what you think we need to know. I know the experience on your island is not what the mainlanders think it is, if it ever was. But what I can promise you is I'm not going to stop paying attention. I'm going to watch every single hearing that has this fiscal control board a part of it. I am going to keep watching these people because I care about you. And I promise to use what little power I have to try to give you more power over your island. And hopefully this episode will inspire some other state-dwelling Americans to do the same. So as I think I mentioned in the last couple of minutes, I'm recording this episode on Friday, March 23rd, which is the day that the fifth continuing resolution ran out, which means that the government has run out of funding. And so today, the 2,232-page omnibus, which funded all 12 sections of government, was signed into law by President Trump. Now, the way this happened was quite dramatic, and I will tell you every one of the details in one of the next two episodes. But short story, we got this 2,232-page monster. We got the text of it Wednesday night at 8 p.m. The House voted on it 17 hours later. The Senate voted on it later that evening, and it became law on Friday morning. So this whole thing went down in less than 48 hours, which is horrendous. And I am terrified of what we're going to find in this bill. But here is my promise to you, because this is what always happens with the omnibus. When the government is funded like this, there's an outrage for about a week, you know, and so that's what's happening right now. The outrage is out there, although they signed it on a Friday. Who knows if anyone's going to remember on Monday. But over the course of the next week, maybe two, we're going to start to hear about the big stories, the big dingleberries that got put into the omnibus. And already there's something called the Cloud Act. So you guys can stop tweeting and emailing me about it. I'm aware that it's there, but something called the Cloud Act got dingleberried into law. Lots of people are pissed. It has to do with, you know, privacy, and I don't even know. But that's what's going to happen. We're going to have like 4 or 5 things that people are like, oh my God, did you know? And then they're going to forget that it ever happened. I'm not going to forget that it happened. And I'm also going to look at all 2,232 pages to find the secrets that most people are not going to bother looking for. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next 2 to 3 episodes. However, the next episode, I'm picking the most interesting dingleberries that no one is talking about for my appearance on the David Pakman Show, because I am flying out to Boston. I'm going to be co-hosting with David his show on Monday, April 9th. But then on Tuesday, April 10th, the show is mine. So for approximately 45 minutes, I get to tell a much larger audience than my own what is going on. And so I really want to knock it out of the park. And because my episodes take a really long time. So what David and I are doing is we're doing a crossover, like a cross promotion episode. So if you want to see the episode, if you want to get the Congressional Dish episode early, you can watch it on the David Pakman Show on April 10th. It's a Tuesday. So you can watch it on the internet, or the following weekend on tax day. That's when I'm going to be releasing the next episode. So that is 3 weeks from now, not 2. But what's cool is that April's got 5 Sundays. So you're still going to get your 2 episodes for April. I'm just going to push it by a week so that I can, first of all, get through 2,232 damn pages, which obviously I'm not going to be able to do that all before David's show, but I'll find some good stories to like deep dive on, because I know there's going to be a ton, because they passed it into law in under 48 hours. Like, no one read this bill. There was absolutely no chance. So God only knows what it's in it. I'm kind of excited to tear it apart in like a terrified kind of way. But yeah, next episode is on April 15th. And then the second one of the month will be April 29th. But in order to do all this work, in order to go to Puerto Rico, and in order to do this damn omnibus bill, I mean, it has been such a roller coaster, guys. I'm not even kidding. Since September, the government was supposed to be funded September 30th, and this has been going on now. It's been 6 months, and the grand finale for me is 2,232 pages. It's ridiculous to even say out loud. So if you guys support the work that I'm doing, I'm doing this without any corporate influence, which is why I'm able to rail against the corporatocracy the way that I do. And when I started Congressional Dish, this was never the intent. I never wanted to be like the anti-corporate Cassandra. But the thing is, this is what I keep finding all over the place, that our government has been hijacked by these multinational corporations, and the entire, global system that they're setting up it's designed just to get these multinationals into new markets, to let them make profits in any way possible. And if they can take over a monopoly like electricity, my God, that's such a great business model, because the customers have to pay them even if their service is shit. And so that's what we're fighting for in this world, is access to markets for multinationals. I didn't expect to find it, but I'm finding it everywhere I go. And why am I saying this? Oh, yeah. So I can say shit like this because I am not depending on corporations for the funding for my show. There is no company that's going to yank the funding because I say something that's offensive or just doesn't, work for their business model. These companies don't want anyone exposing what they're doing. So, this podcast is possible because it operates on the honor system. This is the value for value funding model invented by the No Agenda guys, but it's working, man. This is the right way for me to fund this, even though it is the harder, less consistent way. And the way that it works is that you pay for the episodes if you get value from them. And so if you got value from me traveling to Puerto Rico and letting you know what I saw on the ground and watching these hearings and summarizing the situation as best I can, if you learned something that you didn't know before, and I think that there's value in this. And so I'm asking you to return that value in some kind of financial form. And you get to decide what the value is. There's a lot of small dollar donations, but there's also people that are paying hundreds of dollars a month for this podcast. You get to decide how much value this podcast is giving to you. But I just hope that it's more than zero. And so if you value this podcast at more than zero, please contribute to the show. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. If you want to contribute on a regular basis, which is really, really helpful when I need to budget, You can do that per episode on Patreon or monthly using PayPal or your bank's online bill pay function, because there's no middleman when you guys do that. There's also no middleman when you use Zelle or Venmo or Pop Money. I don't know if they have a fee. They might. Some of these have a fee. I don't know. I updated the support page on congressionaldish.com, so it has all the options for you. But the best one really is to send checks to the Florida P.O. Box. It's not a P.O. Box. It's actually an address. But it's in Florida now. So that way, like the way we do it is your checks go to Florida and then this company sends them to me because I move so often. And so those of you who are sending paper checks already, please switch to the Florida address. And those of you who haven't yet set up a subscription, like that's the address that you can send it to. And then one-time contributions, those are huge too. And we're actually pretty low on the one-time contributions lately. So those of you who haven't contributed for a while, like the podcast could use you right now. Honestly, the podcast has been either going down or steady for the past 4 months. And it's a little demoralizing. So the podcast could use you. I can use you, but it's really all about the value you're getting from this podcast. If you're getting value from this information or entertainment, really, if you find me entertaining, contribute to the podcast, and all your options are listed for you on the support page on congressionaldish.com. Oh, one more thing I need to tell you before the thank yous. Sometime between now and the next episode, I'm changing the feed because a lot of stuff happens in the back here that you don't even know about. And one of the things that I have to do is I've been using a feed that's been going through my website ever since I started this podcast. But when the website went down last summer, some of you guys might remember that the podcast went down with it because of how I was doing this. And so I am changing the feed over to the Libsyn feed so that if the website goes down, your podcast won't be affected. However, I don't exactly know what I'm doing. So I think that we've set it all up on the back end to where it won't affect you. But if it does, if you're having trouble downloading Congressional Dish, I need you to tell me because every app is different and I'm going to have to do a lot of troubleshooting. And because I have, a lot of travel time and stuff going on the next 3 weeks, this is the time I'm going to pull the trigger. So this shouldn't affect you. But if it does, please email me, jen@congressionaldish.com, so I can fix it right away. So yeah, you're an essential part of this podcast because obviously I'm counting on you to help me with this transition. I count on you for finances. And then I'm also counting on you to be the marketing department because I don't really market this thing other than going on other people's shows. It's really been you guys. You're the reason why this show is as big as it is. So thank you for sharing the podcast and please keep up your great work. You guys actually you're doing a really good job. So thank you for sharing your favorite episodes of Congressional Dish. All right. So now it's time to thank everyone who makes this podcast possible with my friend, Miranda Hanna. So back for a repeat performance is my friend Miranda Hanna.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks for coming back.
So happy to be back.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for watching my dog while I was in Puerto Rico.
Of course, I'll watch your dog even while you're not in Puerto Rico. I just want your dog.
I love that you love her so much. Her. I don't have as much guilt as I would otherwise.
I love her so much and she loves me. And I want a dog now because of the relationship I have with Abby, except no dog's going to be as good. Like maybe we should clone her. Didn't
like Barbara Streisand?
Yeah, Babs just did it.
Ugh. Which makes me so mad. I found the perfect dog on a bike path.
Oh, so good. So good.
And I bet hers are like inbred little freaks.
Maybe they're not.
Well, there's just so many nice dogs in shelters. Why do we have to go and clone her little Princess Sam?
Because
that's right. I know her dog's
Because
name.
love is real.
It is.
Jen.
But you can love a shelter dog. You selfish, rich.
All right. So, Jen, how was your trip?
I'm not a fan of Babs anyway.
Tell me about your trip to Puerto Rico. I want to hear all about it.
So, it was really fun. I went with my friend Ryan, the one I went with last year, and then Joe came this year.
Is Ryan the dude that I met that you went to high school with?
You've met a lot. No. That's Matt.
Okay.
Ryan is the one from Massachusetts that I used to work with, slinging timeshares to tourists in Hawaii. And yeah, we've just stayed friends for the better part of a decade now. And so this started a few years ago where he found his birthday's March 15th and mine is March 26th.
Okay.
So this is...
Shameless plug.
I know, it's my birthday on Monday. 326, my favorite number. But yeah, so Ryan, he found a cheap deal to go to Puerto Vallarta a few years ago. So we went for his birthday week, and it's just become a thing. So we did Puerto Vallarta. Last year we did Puerto Rico. And then this year he found this amazing Airbnb. Well, it wasn't amazing, but the balcony was amazing.
Oh my God.
So we were on the penthouse of a condo building on Luquillo's like beach area. And just from one side to the other, it was just pure ocean. You could see forever. It was absolutely incredible.
That sounds incredible.
It was. And what was even more incredible, it was $75 a night.
I was going to ask, so $75 post-hurricane, what would that have gone for?
So Ryan talked to some of the people that lived in the building. One of the days Joe and I were out on like a research mission, but Ryan hung out with the locals on the beach, and he was told that before the hurricane, every single apartment would be full on every single weekend, and this was probably significantly more expensive. But the building was still in rough shape, to be honest. And I found out that the reason it was in such rough shape is that the insurance payments haven't come in yet, because one of the days that we were there, every single condo owner has to send a representative to this meeting that they had, because they finally found out what their first payment was going to be. So now that they have money, they can prioritize, like, what are they going to fix first? But I mean, the pool was cracked and empty, and some of the fences were down. The front door is gone. The elevator. Oh, the elevator.
Oh, the elevator.
My nemesis. Well, because here's the thing. So Joe and I got there first, because Ryan's trip was delayed by a day because of a nor'easter, and then he got to stay an extra day because of another nor'easter.
Alrighty.
Yeah, we had travel issues. All of us did. So Joe and I got there, and we actually stayed in Houston for a night on the way there, because it's such a pain in the ass to get there, just because we take Southwest everywhere. But there was this guy in Denny's, and he's like, "Where are you going?" And I was like, "Puerto Rico." And he's like, "Oh, I've never been out of the country before." And I'm like, "It's America. I don't need a passport. Neither do you. Like, it's a nice taste test for traveling internationally."
Yeah, learn something new every day.
Yeah. So we finally got there. And so we had to check into the Airbnb first. And the lady who checked us in warned us that the electricity was getting to be consistent, but it wasn't always there. And the water was the more hit and miss of the two, and which I did notice. Like, I wanted to wash off the airport, but it was only cold water. I'm like, nope, I'm just going to sleep stinky. Otherwise, the water, it worked the whole time we were there, but the water pressure was leaving a lot to be desired. And then the electricity, because I knew that it could go out, this elevator, which hadn't been inspected.
Dude, I would have taken the stairs.
21 floors. That was the issue.
Maybe I wouldn't have taken the stairs.
Exactly. Maybe you just cross your fingers, try and keep water with you at the whole time. So if the electricity does go out and it doesn't fall and crash to your death on the floor, if the electricity does go out and you're just trapped in there for a day, at least you'll have water. Because I didn't want to get to the situation where I drank my pee.
Dude.
I know. This is where I was so paranoid about this elevator. So
wait, go back. You said it was $79. That's more than it would have been.
$75 for a 2-bedroom condo and the penthouse floor.
Okay.
With like full ocean view.
With possible death by elevator at any time.
Yes.
Seems reasonable.
I mean, I didn't die.
I know. I feel like you would have led with, guys, I got stuck in the elevator, so it didn't happen.
I would have been in the psych ward from being living my worst nightmare.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So the condo wasn't perfect. There was some cosmetic issues, but like for the most part, it was great. And it was $75 a night. And we each had our own room, which is just ridiculous. Last year, Ryan and I stayed at the Embassy Suites by the airport, and I think I paid like $175 a night, which is still great for an Embassy Suites. But we're still like, it's a hotel. Like, at least in this one, we had a kitchen, we had a fridge, like we got to live amongst the locals. And I really think that helped us understand what they were going through too, because we were living it with them in this condo building.
Did they know that you were there to do some investigative?
Last year I was really doing more investigative stuff. This one was more vacation, because I don't think it's any secret that I've been really burned out lately. So our point with this one, Ryan found the Airbnb, and then I like the idea of going back, because it's like, if we're going to do a birthday trip, instead of doing, my favorite vacations, instead of doing an all-inclusive somewhere, like, at least we can go to Puerto Rico and our money would be spent there. and we can find out how they're doing. There were a couple places I was really, really worried about that I just wanted to see if they were still there. So I was like, you know what, let's just do a vacation there, and I'm just going to learn by being there. And then, of course, I get there, and then I started getting researchy. So instead of like partying on Sunday, like all Puerto Ricans do, Joe and I are like driving around the island, like looking at stuff. And so it ended up happening. But no, I wasn't walking in there like, I'm an investigative journalist. Like, I also just don't do that. Like, I wanted to listen to all the hearings, find out what the Fiscal Control Board was doing, like ask locals how they're doing, how can I help, that kind of thing. It was designed to be more of a vacation, and I got much more of an episode out of it than I ever expected.
And were the locals like really happy that you were there?
Yes. And that's what was so cool, is that having been someone who was an Aloha ambassador in Waikiki,
oh my God,
clearly full of shit. I'm such a howlie, but like, that's the thing. Like, so much of this touristy stuff it's crap. It's people like me faking it for a buck. That was not what was happening on Puerto Rico. There was nothing fake about it. So there were a couple owners of a couple different restaurants that were just thanking us for, taking a chance, coming to the island. Thank you for being here. Tell your friends that we're ready for tourism again. And even though most of this episode is documenting how things are worse than they appear in many ways, as a tourist, they are ready to go. Like, where there were problems, they were inconveniences that didn't affect the trip. Like, some of the streetlights are out, but it's affecting the locals because you're not going to be making that crazy left-hand turn out of the neighborhood. The locals are, and they've been doing it for 6 months, and they're actually doing it pretty well. They all drive like maniacs there, so they've figured out a rhythm. But as for where tourists stay, like the hotel areas, Luquillo with their beautiful beach park, it's now open again. Fajardo, we did a kayaking tour our last night there. We went to a bioluminescent bay. So it was dope. So you could put your hand, like, we kayaked out when it was the sun was setting. And
oh my God, I'm gonna cry. This sounds so beautiful.
It was so beautiful. But the thing is, like, Joe and I being, us, we decided to hang back because when they were doing their little safety thing, they asked, how many of you have kayaked before? And Joe and I have kayaked out to islands off of the coast of Hawaii. Like, we're pretty good kayakers. And so it was me, Joe, Ryan, and maybe like 2 other people had ever been on a kayak before. And we're like, oh, there's going to be too many newbies to deal with. So Joe and I decided to be the very last people. And we just watched these people like just go straight into the trees and like bumper kayaks all over the place. There were these
Jerry.
I know, there were these 2 Asian people that like didn't really understand English, and next thing you know, they're like facing us and we're like, you're doing everything wrong. Like, absolutely everything. And then there were these other people that just decided they had to go full speed at all times, so they're just bumping into people, even in this giant bay.
Were they from New York?
It's possible. It's possible. Like, they were aggressive, but no one was talking to them because I was like, I don't want to know you. I'm trying to get away from you. So yeah, just watching these tourists, it was really, really fun. But then we get out to the bay and it was gorgeous. It was huge. And you put your hand in the water and kind of move it slowly and you just see these little like organisms light up.
Oh, so amazing.
It was amazing. And what else was amazing is there were maybe 5 companies that do these tours in the area, and they have a well-oiled machine. Like, they have it staggered. It was great. And they were all running and all their tours were full.
Oh, good. That's great news.
It's great news. So to see, like, the island is coming back. But I just happened to be in the TSA line with some airport executive. And so, of course, I'm like asking her all my questions. And she was telling me that tourism is down 30% from last year. And the airport, they're back at their full staffing. Next week, the first week of April, is when the airlines are doing their full flights again. Like, Puerto Rico is back in business and they are so grateful there. So just like feeling that, it was so... I've never felt like my presence was appreciated in my life, in anywhere I've traveled, like I had in Puerto Rico. So, and that's the thing, like, that's why when I come back, it's such a tale of like, yeah, I saw things that upset me, but I also saw a lot of things that didn't. Like the place in Luquillo, it was called Wepa Arepa. There's this little, it's not even little, it's like the line of restaurants and shops, and it was right on the water. So as the hurricane was hitting, I was like, God, I hope these people are okay. And I had met one of the restaurant owners because I was trying to figure out what to eat. I just wanted something Puerto Rican. And this was last year. and Ryan got pizza, and I was like, no, I'm going to get something Puerto Rican. I don't know what any of these words are, but I'm going to figure it out. And so it was one of those sections where you walk by a restaurant and the people are like, here's a menu, come in, eat our fish. Da, da, da. And I hate everyone who does that. So one guy was just hanging back, letting me like look at the pictures. And then he just asked, do you have any questions? I was like, okay, I'll talk to you. Next thing you know, we're best friends, and he sold these little like fried dough pockets that are filled. They're like tacos, but instead of the shells being like taco shells, it was this fried dough type
like
stuff.
An empanada?
Sort of, but open faced. So it's like you could hold it like a taco, but it was open. And we had a chicken one. It was chicken and rice and cheese. And then he made his own hot sauce. Like, it was just delicious.
Yummo.
So good. Yeah, they call them arepas.
Oh, arepas, yeah.
Yeah. So his place was Wepa Arepa, and I was like, I want to make sure he's still there. And so one of the first things Joe and I did is we went to that line to see, is it there? And it totally was. So it's like these places survived. Like when you hear and you see a category 5, like Maria just churning in the ocean, like it was category 4 when it hit. But it just went right through the center of the island. And you kind of in your head imagine that everything's going to be gone.
Yeah.
And that was not the case. Like they're back up and running. There's fewer trees for sure. There's still some places that are damaged. You could see them doing construction while we were there. But Wepa Arepa was there. It wasn't open the first day, so he's not working. He said he had 2 locations because I talked to him again. He has 2 locations. That one in Luquillo is open. His other one's not open yet. So it's like, they're working on it.
Did he talk to you about his finances at all? Like how is he? No, it wasn't like that. I'm just curious to see like, how he's surviving post.
I mean, everybody said that the locals going out on Sundays is helping everyone.
Okay, that's awesome.
It is, but the locals are paying for enough. You know, the locals are paying for extra gas for generators. They had to pay for waters. Like they had to pay for a lot of stuff. So I think everyone on the island in one way or another, at least, you know, the people that aren't Hank Paulson and the rich people, but the regular people of Puerto Rico, I can't imagine that their finances are great because during the hurricane, like they did have to pay for a lot. And I know that a lot of businesses had to close. They're still having to close, you know?
Is there a percentage for how many are open versus?
I don't know.
No,
but even last year, there was a lot that were kind of abandoned and closed. There was definitely more this year, but whatever number they were to put out there, I don't even know if we could trust it because I don't know what they're comparing it to. Like if they tell you that, like here's one of the things that's making me nuts is the electricity numbers. Like pretty much it's agreed in all of the mainland press that at least 92% of people have electricity back, which I don't know how they're counting that. Like, are they saying that the houses that have people actively living in them have electricity? Like, maybe that number would make sense that way. Because, like, for instance, I met she was a listener, Angela, so lovely. She met up with us on Monday and gave us a tour of her hometown. And I love her so much.
That's really cool.
It was really cool. Her situation, though, her mother is not living in their house in Yabucoa because there's no electricity, and without electricity, there's no water. So it's like she can't really live there. So she's living with her sister in San Juan. Well, are they counting her as with electricity because she's in San Juan? So there's just a lot of different ways to twist this. This is the other thing too. They're also saying that 99% of people have water back. Well, technically, yeah, if the electricity was on, her house would have water, but you need electricity to run the pumps. So no, she can't live there and turn on the faucet because a lot of these people, what I heard from the locals I talked to, a lot of them said, if I have water, I'm good. I can deal with no electricity. And I kind of understand that too. Like I can live by candle, go to bed early, change my sleep schedule so I'm up at 6. Like I can make it work. But if you don't have water, that's a life-sustaining thing. And so those numbers, in reality, those aren't making sense either because every single person that doesn't have electricity to run the pumps, which get the water to the house, you don't have water. And so the stats are saying like 99%. So it's just stuff like that. And even in our place, even if you have water, some days you don't.
Right. So how was the experience in your Airbnb?
We were fine. We were there for 6 days. The lady who checked me in said that 4 days prior was the last time she didn't have water, and it was for 6 hours. So it was spotty, but we just kind of got lucky.
Okay.
I also don't know. We weren't in the condo that much. It was kind of just morning and evening. So if it had gone out in the middle of the day, I never would have known.
Gotcha.
But it didn't affect us. And the thing about going as a tourist, if we were to stay in the hotels that are open, especially in the San Juan area, like I wouldn't even be worried about it.
Yes. Okay.
Like they're up and running in San Juan. Like San Juan is doing really, really well. It gets like we were 45 minutes outside San Juan when we did that on purpose because I wanted to see what it was like where people were actually living.
That's great.
Yeah. But it was such a fun trip.
Yeah. So tell
I'm
me,
so glad we
tell me
went.
about something. Can you tell me about like a fun thing that you did besides the water thing?
Well, we spent St. Patrick's Day.
Oh boy.
In Puerto Rico.
Let me sit down for this one.
So on it was 2 days before St. Patrick's Day, I think. We were at this great little restaurant/bar thing that was on the water in Luquillo. It was called Board Riders, something like that. Yeah. So we were sitting there and we were at one of those, like those kind of benches that are facing outwards in places that have a good view. So it's like Joe, Ryan, and I were facing the same direction towards the water, towards the street. You know what I mean?
Okay. You guys are same side sitters on the bench?
Yes. But it was just one of those, like, there's us sitting on one side, then there's the thing where we put our drinks, and then the other side is people walking back and forth.
Oh, okay. It's like a boardwalk type thing.
Yeah. And so we were sitting there just watching the people go by, watching the waves, whatever. So the sun goes down and these 4 elderly people roll up and they are shit-faced. I have not seen people this hammered in quite a while. And this lady rolls up and sticks a pig snout right in front of me. And she's just like, we just got back from a pig roast. And there's like a snout and she's walking away. And I'm like, hey, come back and get your face. Like, I don't want this snout. Like, what's the matter with you, lady? So she comes back and she's like laughing. So they sit down, and the next thing you know, Bob rolls by, and he's just like, so there is a St. Patrick's Day party here every year, and there's a parade, and we started it, and you should come. And so, of course, we're like, yep, we'll be there.
Nice.
And we didn't know what this thing was. I looked it up online that morning, and it had happened before, but this is not a big thing. They made it sound like a big thing. When we showed up, there was like 50 people and they had like a mobile DJ, which was a guy in a van.
15 or 50?
50.
Okay.
So, I mean, it wasn't insignificant, but it wasn't like we have a parade. It was a bunch of people walking for maybe a mile, like probably not even a mile. And then they had closed down a street and they had set up like picnic tables and chairs. And it was all very much like a church function is what it felt like.
Oh my God, that's really cute.
It was really, really cute. Yeah. So that's where I met Carmen and I loved her. Like they were doing all the St. Patrick's Day stuff and the guys are running around drinking and having fun. And I'm there with Carmen and just like, so like, what's it like being in Puerto Rico? Like how long were you without power? Just asking all the questions. We are Facebook friends now.
Oh, good.
Yeah, she was awesome. And I talked to her for probably like at least an hour. But yeah, and we got to meet some locals and go to a little bar. Then we went to a different one that was down the street. And it was a fun, just local day. And what was kind of crazy too is when they started the whole thing, like after everyone sat down, the guy takes a microphone. He's like, thanks you all for coming out. And, and it's been a really rough year, but Maria can't stop us today. And everyone just like roars. But that was kind of crazy too, how no matter where you were and whatever you were doing, Maria was there. She was always there. And it's inescapable. It's every block. It's on everyone's mind. It's constant. But in a way where I think it's really brought together a lot of people on the island. And something felt different this time.
That is really interesting.
Yeah.
Can you go into that a little bit more? I'm curious.
I mean, what felt different is when I was talking to people, like last year, I was fascinated by this fiscal control board that Congress put in charge of Puerto Rico that's really just dictating all their finances. The Puerto Ricans had no role in selecting who's on it, or even if it were to be in existence. It's something that like Congress did to Puerto Rico. And so that's one of the reasons I was fascinated and wanted to go for the podcast last year and be like, what the hell is going on here? And I didn't feel like I knew that the papers were paying attention, and I had heard on the street, because they call it the junta, which I think tells you everything about how they feel about it. But I wasn't feeling like people were all that political. Like it was just a much more like party atmosphere all the time. It wasn't like that this year. I think the unfairness of what's happening is hitting a peak. And I think that it's going on for so long. There was just something different this time. And it wasn't like a broken spirit type of thing. It was just like a more resolved, we're getting through this. I think it's going to be harder maybe when the dust settles for some of this unfair stuff to continue. Although governmentally, they're doing so much so fast that I think the people of Puerto Rico are going to get whiplash. Because I asked my friend Carmen, who like knew what was going on. I was like, how do you feel about them privatizing the electricity company? She said, I don't even know what you're talking about. I was like, oh, so they don't even know in a lot of cases what's happening, which makes perfect sense to me. Because when I was there, like, last year, because I was in a hotel, I was reading the San Juan Star every day. I don't even know where I could get a newspaper this time. I mean, Walgreens maybe. But I wasn't, the TVs were all on sports. And again, if you don't have electricity, how are you getting on the internet? How are you watching TV? Like if you don't have electricity, you're really unaware of what's happening on the governmental level. And I think that's on purpose. But yeah, I think people are pissed about what's happening. People are really pissed about the death toll still staying at 64.
I can't believe that.
I heard about that so many times where people are like, they're saying that only 64 of us have died and people are angry. As they should be.
That feels like a stomach punch.
Exactly. And we have such a nasty colonial history with Puerto Rico, but just to, the Trump throwing the paper towels was super offensive. I heard about that a bunch of times too. I mean, people are really angry. But I mean, why should Trump care? I mean, obviously he should care as like a human, but it's Trump. But they don't get to vote for president. So they have nothing that they can hold over these elected representatives because they don't get to elect them. Only we do. So when I go there, I feel like such a responsibility for us on the mainland to do something for them because they're really voiceless in all this. And there's such an awareness of that right now. Like I don't know if they were always like this because obviously I've been there twice. Like I'm far from an expert on it. But the awareness, it was everywhere. It was absolutely everywhere. And you could just tell that these communities, I think when you don't have electricity, you have a lot of time to hang out, meet your neighbors.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of forced back into that
community.
To a community. That is very interesting.
Yeah. It was cool to be a part of, even for just a day.
And did you feel safe while you were there?
Yeah, I did. The first day when we were driving up, just because I'm so used to like my lovely infrastructure bubble from the mainland, driving through our neighborhood, I mean, it's still messy. But I remember this neighborhood from last year. It was always pretty run down. It's just worse now. I mean, the blue tarps, like that's one of the things that I've heard about. I didn't expect to find them everywhere like I did, but there's a lot of people whose roofs are literally blue tarps. And so I was in a blue tarp neighborhood. There was a bunch of them. And there were cars that didn't have wheels that are just kind of on the side of the road, and there's stray dogs and stray cats. And so just kind of the culture shock of that, I'm like, oh my God, where am I? By the time we're leaving, like there was a little dog that would come out and like bark at me. And there was a guy who was always sitting in the shadows, like right behind the dog. By the time I'm leaving, I'm like, hola, like, it's like my old friend. And a lot of our streetlights were out. So everyone was walking in the dark. But when everyone's walking in the dark, it's not that scary. And obviously we weren't doing it by ourselves and we were only staying within our neighborhood. But no, I mean, once you kind of meet the people and you see the way this community where everybody knows everybody, like it wasn't scary at all. It's just different because their infrastructure is such a mess that it looks different. It looks run down. It looks scary, but poverty doesn't mean, people are mean. And in this case, it isn't even necessarily poverty. I mean, this was storm damage. So no, it was...
I mean, I'm thinking in general of like the things that would keep me from going to Puerto Rico, just fears. Well, maybe it's not safe if it's under construction, but
yeah. And I think a lot of people are feeling that way, especially where the information, like if you're reading stuff about the electricity situation and all of that and everything that I talked about in the first half of the episode, you can look at that and be like, oh, I want nothing to do with that. But the truth is that, San Juan, all the lights are on. The street lights are working. Everything's fine. And that's where most people stay. So if you're going to go to the island, like, just stay in a hotel or an Airbnb in Isla Vista or Condado or San Juan, like, you're fine. Because that's what I did last year too. I was nervous about it. I was like, I don't know what this place is. So I stayed at the Embassy Suites on the airport runway.
I can't get any more American than that.
I know. Scared white chick, but I still went. And then this year,
great.
We kind of like graduated to a neighborhood 45 minutes away.
I think it's so amazing that you went, and I'm so glad that I have a firsthand account.
Oh, I loved it so much. And the food, Miranda.
Ooh, talk to me about that.
I know. So I gained 4 pounds.
Okay.
I got my Weight Watchers, like you did it, only on the way there. Every day after that, it was like off the rails. I kept getting churrasco, which is this steak with a chimichurri, like it's a parsley type sauce that's on it. And it came with rice and beans, but it was like this red rice. So it has like the flavors kind of like Mexican rice, but with big red beans in it and like chunks of meat. I don't even know what the meat was. It was just delicious. And so I was eating that everywhere I could. They had this stuff called mofongo, which was, I hate bananas, right? I want them eliminated from the planet. I think they smell. I want nothing to do with them. But mofongo is made of plantains, which is basically like a tiny banana. It was delicious. It reminded me of like mashed potatoes kind of, only with flavor. Like, I don't even know how to describe this, but I was eating it all over the place and really enjoying it.
I think plantains are big bananas.
I wouldn't know. I only ate them smashed as mofongo.
We'll have to fact check this episode.
Yeah, what the hell is a plantain? We don't have to fact check because there's going to be approximately 3,000 know-it-alls that are going to be like, well, let me tell you about the history of the plantain.
About the size of a plantain.
Yeah. So the listeners will let us know about the plantain.
Well, we can always count on you.
Yeah. And then they had all these fried things. So like empanadas were there and fried cheese, which is only my biggest weakness. They had mozzarella sticks everywhere, but then they also had like this Puerto Rican cheese that they would just fry. They had cheese balls. Do you like those like bright orange, bad for you?
Like a cheese ball?
Yeah, like a cheese ball that comes in the tub from Costco.
Oh, wait a minute. Like
processed.
Like something you get for Christmas? Like a cheese ball rolled in nuts?
Like cheese...
Cheese
crunchy. No.
Wait, cheese balls in a big tin?
Yeah. Like they come in the big plastic thing and they...
Puffed corn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't love a cheese ball?
Exactly.
I don't love what it's made out of, but I've eaten them.
Yeah, because cheese balls are basically processed things covered in cancer,
Pretty much.
But they made like an authentic version of something like that. So it was cheddar cheese, real cheddar cheese, wrapped in this seasoning that they made that tasted kind of like that, but you could tell it was like Parmesan and flour. And the guy gave me the whole list, but it was like this mixture of cheesy stuff that when fried tasted like that, like all the deliciousness with none of the cancer, with melty cheddar cheese in the middle.
Oh my God. And they were called cheese balls?
Fried cheese balls.
Fried cheese balls.
Which, of course, I'm off the Weight Watchers rails and I'm like, I'm getting these everywhere.
When you ordered it, what did it come with? Like, did it come in a big container?
No, it was like on a plate. We got this at a restaurant. I put it on Instagram, of course.
Oh, I didn't see it. I'm gonna look.
It was in my story.
Ugh, I'm so bad at checking the gram.
I know. And I don't get it yet. So I do everything in the stories. But regardless, like it was on a little plate. And there were 6 of them. It came with some little sauce, but fuck the sauce. If it tastes like cheese balls, that's enough for me.
No one ever.
I'm not a big sauce person if cheese is involved. Like it's good enough for me. And then in a bunch of places, I noticed that they would have the fried cheese with chorizo. It was like one plate, which is just heaven. So
what are you saying to me? Chorizo?
Chorizo, like a spicy sausage.
Is that the way white girls say it?
Yeah. I mean,
I'm Portuguese, so it's chorizo.
Well, I'm
probably saying it
white
wrong.
and from Southern California. I'm pretty damn sure it's chorizo.
Chorizo.
At least with my white accent.
Chorizo.
My Orange County accent.
I'll take an order of chorizo with the cheese balls fried.
Yeah, I did that. So yeah, the food was just incredible. And it was everywhere. Everywhere we went, the food was good. There was not a single thing that I ate that I was like, I could
Do
pass
they
up on
import a lot of their food supply? Where does it come from?
I don't know. They must. Although I definitely noticed that there were lots of cows, which kind of explains the whole churrasco thing, because you can get that steak just about anywhere. And chickens, just like in Hawaii, there were just chickens everywhere, which I love chickens. I eat them. I actually got a rotisserie chicken the first night there from the grocery store. It's one of the best rotisserie chickens I've had in a while. I'm kind of like that girl from Girl Interrupted that eats the chickens in my bed and then like hides the bones.
You're kind of like that girl.
Yeah. Except I don't really hide the bones. I'll throw the bones away. But yeah, I eat whole chickens. It's kind of psychotic. And so when I saw these chickens, I was like, I need to try it. It was delicious. And these chickens were just in the road, in the condo building. Like they were everywhere. So I can imagine that the people that are selling chicken on the side of the road are probably hunting some chicken on the island.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, so they definitely have some stuff of their own, but I don't know where most of their food comes from. I mean, the grocery store was fully stocked. So, and if anyone's worried about any of that, like, will I be able to find water and food? Like, yes. Okay. There was no problems.
Man, I'm kind of wanting to make a trip to Puerto Rico.
You would love it, dude.
I've never been.
You should meet your family there. You're an East Coaster. It's only 3 hours from New York and Boston.
We're Portuguese. We're not Puerto Rican. But I get what you're saying now.
No, I'm not being racist about it. I'm saying like,
I was like, we're not from Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most people go to like the Virgin Islands. For some reason, I feel like there's a lot of people that skip Puerto Rico, and you should not. It is so much fun.
I just never really thought about going there, you know?
Well, and that's the thing that we can do. You know, at this point, donations are obviously, and we donated some stuff ourselves while we were there, but we donated citronella candles to an old age community.
You know what? I saw that post, actually.
Yeah. And that was one of the most rewarding things that we did while we were there.
That's something that they super need.
Well, so when we got there, I didn't have a plan for what we were going to do to like give back or whatever. So we talked to the locals and we were like, the people that still don't have electricity, what do they need? Like, do they need
Great
lots
question.
of water?
I love this.
And they were like, no, the government's providing the food and the water. That's not really a problem. And plus, like, the donations are just happening. So that's not an issue. But this one girl was like, you know, there's a mosquito problem. And then obviously they don't have lights. And she's like, so if it were me, I would bring citronella candles. I was like, done. Because that's
so you actually brought them?
Yeah, we went to a grocery store and cleaned them out of citronella candles. We spent
from America?
$100s. No, the grocery store in Lucia.
Once you got there. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. And so we had seen that they had a bunch of them. So we went, and the guy who's funny, one of the guys that was working there was restocking all this stuff. And so I was just taking all of his citronella
I'm sure
candles.
he loved you. You couldn't have just asked for a box in the back. Sorry.
Well, no, he was... He was like smiling. He's like, no, take them. I think they figured out what we were doing. Cause I was like, I'm not this afraid of mosquitoes where I'm filling up a shopping cart of citronella. Like I'm not that psycho.
I'm sorry. I just went back to my old retail days. I'm like, can you just ask for a box in the back?
Yeah.
So,
like, hey,
please.
butthole, you're making my job harder. But I wanted all of them. So we left a few just in case someone needed them. But like we cleaned out that store.
Oh my God, that must have made you feel so good.
I just hope that it made their lives a little bit better. But where was I going with this?
Something about thank yous?
Yeah, maybe we should start those, huh? Yeah, we should start those.
Let's read.
But yeah, it was a great trip. And oh yeah, how they're like stocked and everything.
Okay,
like,
yeah.
There's just, as a tourist, as someone who wants to go there and have a good time, but one of the things we can do to give back aside from donations is go there. You know, like if you're going to take a vacation in the Caribbean, pick Puerto Rico or the Virgin. Oh, I can't testify that the Virgin Islands are okay, but like I can testify that Puerto Rico is ready for you and like wants you to go. So pick Puerto Rico.
That's great. That's
know?
So good to know. I love that.
Yeah. So I loved it. And Joe was like, I want to come back. And so we'll go back eventually. But yeah, how about we thank the people that helped make that trip possible? Okay. Otherwise, I'd be broke and couldn't travel in these places. So we did get some new subscribers, which is nice because we also had a few disappear. But on Patreon, we got a raise from Josh Bowers. He gave us a raise from $7.50 an episode to $12.50 an episode. So thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
Jonathan Eichman is now contributing $10 an episode on Patreon. So thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
We are getting announced. Oh, because this is a weird name. It's 1I11G is the Patreon name. And they gave us a raise from $5 an episode to $10 an episode.
Wait, from what to what?
from 5 to 10.
Oh,
so
that
double. Love it.
is beautiful.
Yeah. So thank you. We're also now getting a $15 a month check from Kyle Winfield. So thank you, Kyle.
Appreciate it.
We're getting $6 an episode from Kim McLean. Thank you, Kim. We're getting $5 an episode from the Independent Outsider. Love that name. And then we're getting $5 an episode from Corey Mark. So thank you guys. It was a very short subscriber section this week. Remember last week it went on for like 45 minutes? But yeah, thank you all to those of you who subscribed because we broke about even, which is good.
That's
based on
great.
like cancellations versus, my dad, one of the things my dad sent me is like over the last 5 months, like I am breaking even. Like the show is not growing, the money is not growing, but like I'm breaking even.
I mean,
so that's something.
You got to feel good about that in a
not
sense.
Really. I would hope that it would be going up, but I'm paying my bills. So
We're working on it.
yeah. And I have some really big stuff coming up in April, which I should actually probably mention. On April 2nd, I don't know when he's going to release it, but I'm super excited about this. I'm going to go on Sam Tripoli's podcast called the Tinfoil Hat Cast. So I'm super excited to do that one. And that's more of like a fun conversation. He just wants to know like, what things do I know that other people don't know? And he asked me to send an email and like with a list of things to talk about. I'm like, okay, there's only like 35. I've found out so much this year. So I'm doing that. Plus I have the David Pakman appearance where I'm like hosting his show.
That's
so that'll
the Boston
be huge.
thing, right?
Yeah. And then Governor Jesse Ventura has asked me back on his show. We're just trying to find a date that I'm actually here to do it.
Jesse the Snake Ventura?
You mean the body?
Oops, yeah, that's what I mean. Jesse the body.
Are you thinking about his snake?
I was thinking about
tell your
Jake the
husband.
Snake.
No, you're thinking
Different wrestler. I think they both had mustaches though.
I don't know. But Jesse Ventura was known as the body, and he was the governor of Minnesota.
Can you have him sign something for me?
Not really, because I think he lives in Mexico now.
Okay.
So we do it. So I get to go to the same places, like when you watch CNN or MSNBC and they're doing it remotely. So someone can be talking to Rachel Maddow. She's in Boston, but you can do it from San Francisco.
Yeah.
So I'm in the same studio. They just kind of like book a time and you go to these things and it's one person after another. So I go there. And the way it worked last time, it's actually not that sophisticated of a situation because they had a TV behind me. It was just like a TV screen with like the Golden Gate or whatever. So that's what was behind my head. It's really a low tech type of operation. And then in front of me is the camera. And to get me to actually look at the camera, they taped a picture of Barack Obama to it, which actually made me look away because it was super awkward to be staring at Barack Obama. And so when you watch the video, the last time I was on Governor Ventura's show, like I'm all over the place. Like I'm just like looking up at the ceiling and to the side because I just don't want to make eye contact with Barack Obama. So
I'm dying.
This year I need to work on like stare into his dreamy eyes.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I wonder if everybody gets Barack or they were just like, no, we'll give her Obama.
What?
I wonder if everybody gets Obama to stare at or they just thought that's
don't know
who you wanted to
This
stare
looked
at.
like something that had been jerry-rigged for a while. I don't think they were catering to me. Plus, why would they pick Barack Obama?
I don't know.
They should clearly pick Tom Brady.
Clearly.
So they either didn't know me or it's Barack for everyone. So yeah, I'm hoping that by introducing the show to new audiences this month that it'll go up. Plus the Amazon hit was a big one. So I think that's part of it too, is like we're still making up for the money that we lost. It was about $500 to $800 a month that was coming in through Amazon. That's just gone ever since October. So we still haven't really made up for that. So yeah, so that's what's going on with my finances. It's so weird that my finances are like public record, but whatever. We did also get some one-time contributions. And this was the thing too. I took a big drop in one of the months and it was 100% one-time contribution. So these really are important too, because I can count on the subscribers, but one-times like they go up and down so dramatically. So it was a difference of, I think, like $1,500. But yeah, we did get some one-time contributions. So we got a $280 check. That's excited from Justin Daniel.
Wow. Thanks, Justin.
Oh, Lauren says this is the check that we returned to Justin with the pre-addressed envelope. Were you here when I talked about that?
No, I don't know about that.
Yeah. He sent in a check and then it went to I can't remember exactly which one it went to, but for whatever reason, we didn't get it very fast. I think it was in the batch that we forgot to send to my sister. So when he didn't hear that I had gotten it, he sent another check. And we were like, we had already deposited the first one. We're like, we don't really know what to do about this. So we sent it back with like a wedding envelope that was already stamped or whatever. And we're like, we want you to choose what to do. Cause like he said that I can decide, but I'm like, it's not up to me to decide if I, it just like didn't feel right. So he sent it back.
Oh, nice.
And he said, "Dear Lauren and Jen." Oh, this is the first time someone addressed it to Lauren.
Oh,
That's
wow.
so
That's your
exciting.
sister?
Yep. She's famous now, which is like, she doesn't want that, which is so funny. But dear Lauren and Jen, consider the check payment forward for a while. The podcast is awesome. I wish it wasn't so stressful. Me too. My thanks again. Looking forward to new episodes. I really appreciate giving me the option on the check. Best regards, Justin. That's awesome.
Thanks, Justin.
I'm glad that solution worked out. We didn't know what to do. We also got a $75 payment from Jans Ivan Nielsen. I think this is one that was from Denmark, if I remember correctly, because I did a local radio. Well, it's not a radio show. It's a podcast, obviously. Peter Collins. And one of his listeners contributed to the show.
That is amazing.
Yeah, I love it when people tell me how they heard of it. So yeah, thank you, my friend from the other side of the pond. We also got a $50 Venmo payment from Chris Briney, who said, "Just found your podcast. Awesome work. Can't wait to start wading through the backlog." Oh, there's a lot there. Well, thank you, Chris. I hope you enjoy it. We also got $50 from Brian Watson of Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you, Brian. We got $50 from Kellen McLean of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Thank you, Kellen. We got $25 on PayPal from Andrew Yakira. Thank you, Andrew. $25 check from Kirk Elzer of Sherman Oaks, California. Thank you, Kirk.
Thanks, Kirk.
We got $22.22 from my friend Brandon Ellsbury. He's from Orlando, Florida.
2222.
Yes, fun number. And he is starting a new podcast about the Supreme Court. It's called The 10th Justice, if anyone wants to check it out. So thanks, Brandon. We also got $21 from Jason Francis. Now, this came in two payments. So one was a $20 PayPal payment with this note. It said, "That $45 a month cancellation guy is a total douchebag." I don't know about that. I feel like I just need to get my emotions in check. I do think it's rude, and maybe it's like a pet peeve. I don't know. Maybe you can tell me if it actually is me or if it is rude, but it makes me crazy when people tell me what they're expecting me to say and get mad at me because I don't say what they want to hear. Like it happened to get on Twitter today. Like today's March 22nd, I believe. And so they're funding the entire government as we speak. The bill that dropped last night at 8 p.m. is 2,232 pages. So that is my April. Super pissed about it. And there's something in it. I don't even remember what it's called, but some guy's like, "I'm expecting to hear about this." And I'm just like, this makes me want to say no. Just like, don't tell me what to do. I think that's just like the anti-authority thing in me where I'm just like, don't tell me what I should be saying or what I should be doing. Like, and I just feel like when it happens, maybe I need to calm down.
Well,
but he pulled funding because I didn't like, that's what, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about it, but I don't think he's a douchebag.
I think that this is definitely something, to consider just in general. I totally get why I totally get where you're coming from, that you are not, if somebody's expecting something, you are not expected to provide it because you're providing a general, like the general knowledge. You're not working
for free.
For free. I think a lot of things, but why does this person expect it is kind of my question. Yeah. Is it just like, is that just kind of the lane that this person is in? Like, they usually get what they expect. I don't know. I don't know his story. However, it might be something for you to consider in the future. Like, what do you guys want to hear about? If you have time.
I don't ask that for a reason. Yeah. Like if I ever get to the place where I've run out of content, sure, I'll do that. But I need, like, if I'm going to spend 2 weeks researching something and put together a show, it needs to be the thing that's inspiring me the most. And right now, at least in September, I've been going nonstop because they keep funding the government. So it's like, I have a to-do list.
Right.
That's a lot of important shit. Like, I haven't even done the tax bill yet. I wanted to do it for tax day. Like, nope, can't. We still haven't funded the government.
Question, what is it that he is expecting?
He wanted me to do an episode on like a topic that he
just
wanted
his
to pick
own
the
topic, not related to any of the stuff that's coming through right now that other people need to know about.
No. It wasn't about something that was happening in Congress right now, not about a bill or a law. Like, no. I mean, even if it was, There are 5,000 bills introduced in every Congress. And it's also just like the way that it's approached sometimes, I think that was just like a rough, like, I'm pulling my funding because you didn't do this. Like,
that's like, I'm taking my ball home because you guys don't play right the way I want. No, I get that part.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe
I think it's mean to call that guy. Like, I don't want to.
Yeah, we don't have to call him a douchebag. But hey, if that guy's loaded and he wants you to do like a thing, maybe he can fund it. Like, you can't have everything you want, buddy. Like, do you see what I'm saying?
I think that
I don't know.
Because there's so many people that are a part of the show, I think a lot of people can and do take ownership of it, feel like they're a part of it, and they should, because they're essential. Like, I say it all the time, like, the podcast wouldn't exist without these people. But the way that I kind of see it in my head is like the payment is for the work I've already done. So like, if someone listens to 10 episodes and gets something valuable from 7 of them, I think it's fair for them to pay for those 7. Like, I think about it as like, you're paying for the work that's already completed. And like, maybe putting an investment towards the future work, but that doesn't mean you get to determine what it is, because how could I possibly listen to every single person and take all of their suggestions and A, not lose my mind, but B, do a like coherent show. So, and it's just the way it's approached. Like, if the guy on Twitter had said, hey, heads up, this is in the omnibus, my reaction would be like, oh, thank you. Send me whatever you have, which actually happened. I had a tale of 2 people. 2 people are telling me about the same exact thing in the omnibus. One of them was like, I'm expecting to hear it. And I was just like, well, I don't want to talk about it. Just like, that was my first reaction. Another person sent me a message about it in the back and just like, hey, heads up, this is in the omnibus. And I was like, well, thank you. I don't really know anything about it. So he sent me some more links, like totally different interaction.
Yeah.
So I just don't like the feeling of being bossed around, especially right now where I haven't been doing fluff. I'm not just like picking random episodes. Like, I've been very careful about what I've been doing. And it's just been one funding bill after another. For the first time since I've started Congressional Dish, is becoming law at a very fast pace. And this is exactly why I was crying on election night. Like, I saw this coming. I was like, for the first time, like, they're going to pass stuff into law. I'm not going to be able to keep up. I've been afraid of this bill that's happening right now as we speak. 2,232 pages. Like, that's going to take me to the entire month of April. And this is where they're going to stick most of the stuff. Like, this is the bill of the Congress. So, although we might get another one in the lame duck next year, because there's no way they're going to finish 2019 funding by September 30th now. Like, they haven't even started the process and we're already halfway through their work period for that. So, I mean, I don't see any way that that's happening on time, but like, this bill is a goddamn monster. So like, no, I'm not going to stop what I'm doing because there's an issue that's important. There's a lot of issues that are important. I can't possibly do them all. So that's what my like reaction is. But like, I don't want us to get to that place where we like call names. Because then when I think about this particular person, he did support the podcast for a long time.
Yeah.
And like, that support matters to me too. So it's kind of like, thank you. I'm not thrilled about how we broke up, but like,
I'll always remember you.
We had good times.
You were one of my first.
And you always remember the first. So
yeah, but I'm standing by what I said. If this guy wants to like fund you for something, maybe you can do like an offshoot project when your brain when
I'm
your
not offering to do that.
When your head is attached to your body again.
Well, it's gonna be a while. So
Girl.
I'm on burnout mode and I have this 2,000 page monster in front of me. So I don't know. But back to Jason's note. Okay, so this was his first note. He had the $20 note and it said, I also love that you're going back to Puerto Rico for us. Can't wait to hear that update. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. And then Miranda, he sent in a second note. This was a $1 Venmo payment. And he said, I already donated $20 this time around, but after hearing bang for the cluck, I had to throw in an extra buck for being so punderful.
Oh my God, I'm punderful.
Yes. And you earned the show $1.
I feel very proud about that $1.
I think I'm going to Venmo you $1.
You get out. I mean,
that is your
then I'm
$1.
Venmoing it right back. I'm going to be like the guy with the check.
Thank you.
I'm going to just give you the check back like that other guy.
We can just throw dollars at each other. Thank you, Jason. That was cool.
Thanks, Jason.
We also got a $20 Venmo from Kim Good. Thank you, my friend. We got a $20 Venmo from Danny Truster, who said this is for the sassy commentary. Thank you, Danny. We also got $11 more from Seeing in Fabric. Did you check out the Instagram?
I did. It's
So
really
good.
cool. I kind of want to talk to her about how it's done.
Yeah, him, I'm not sure, but so much talent. I love it. I'm following on Insta now. But the note said, "Hi, Jennifer. Thanks so much for reading my entire email on the air and responding to it. I completely agree that there is no meaning anymore to left and right. It's just another way to pit us against each other instead of working together. Here's an extra $10 plus a percentage fee for making me feel special and for saying the name of my website. Plus to help me make up a little for the people who stopped supporting you recently. You rock, happy face." Thank you. And Miranda and I are so impressed with your work. So Seeing in Fabric, you guys, check it out because this is some incredible, very different art.
Beautiful stuff.
Yeah. We also got a $10 Zelle payment from Douglas Doyce, who said, bonus for trying to pronounce, oh no, he's going to make me do it again. Trying to pronounce, my friend Jeff from New Orleans sent me a message 2 weeks ago telling me how to pronounce it's the Louisiana place. He told me how to do it.
What are you saying? Calistoga?
No, Calcasieu. He told me how to say it and I've already forgotten.
Cal.
Calcasio, I think is how I called it before, and it's just not accurate. It's so inaccurate. So, but I just tried again and failed. So I guess I got $10
I wish
for that.
I knew what you were talking about.
So I got a bonus for butchering that word.
Thank you.
And then he said, and fuck that guy for trying to control your voice. Got someone else to listen to your show today. Well, thank you for sharing the podcast, Douglas.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. We also got a $10 check from David Breitman of Aptos, California. And the memo said, Congressional Dish 168, you are a treasure. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. We also got a $10 PayPal from Renita Leone, whose note said, sharing your alternate reality feeling lately. Thanks for sharing the frustration so eloquently. Keep the focus on the important issues, even if everyone is following the clickbait. Oh, thank you.
So good.
Yeah, it makes me feel better.
You are a treasure.
Oh,
You're
thanks.
a national treasure.
That's ridiculous. But
that was a great movie.
All right. And then we got a $10 payment from Jeff Epstein of Citizens Media. This is on PayPal, and this email is really long. See, this is my problem with reading all the emails. I like to, but this is going to be really long. This is why I feel like at some point we're going to have to cut them off. We won't make that day today, but
yeah, read away.
Let's dive in. All right. It says, hi, Jen. I discovered you on the Young Turks a few months ago. The first Congressional Dish episode I listened to was on net neutrality, and it blew my mind. I am now a semi-regular listener and just contributed my first $10. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
In your most recent March 11th episode regarding the budget, I noticed a few pretty important mistakes regarding modern monetary theory.
Okay.
I don't know how I can make mistakes about a thing that I have never talked about, but I only learned about this concept about a month ago, but I have a pretty solid basic understanding. As one of the more important voices in the progressive community, and as someone who clearly knows her stuff and is not afraid of research, I hope you might consider looking into this a little bit and correcting things as you go forward. What? In particular, PAYGO makes no sense. Interest on the debt definitely makes no sense. And in many respects, even debt makes no sense. The federal government prints their own money. They can afford anything they want to. The word afford is meaningless as far as the federal government is concerned. The federal government does not need to come up with the money to pay for anything because they print their own money. It's a fiat currency. It's not backed by gold. It hasn't been backed by gold since 1971. This is quite the rabbit hole. The government can afford whatever it wants to. That's not true. The only reason they can't afford programs that benefit the powerless, like Medicare for all, free college, $15 minimum wage, job guarantee, forgiving student loans, etc., is because they don't want to. It's not a coincidence that whenever Medicare for all comes up, suddenly there's all this discussion about, but how do we pay for it? Stress and rigmarole about how it will bankrupt the country, the poor national debt that our grandchildren will be stuck with, etc. But when we pay for war or anything that benefits the powerful, it just magically happens immediately with no discussion. That's not true either. It happens in an appropriation process every year. Back to the note, even though the latest increase was more than enough to pay for free college. I don't know about the accuracy of that. One last thing, importantly and very mind-bendingly, taxes pay for nothing, absolutely nothing. I don't even know where to...
Yikes. I am unqualified to comment.
I drove here on some roads that I'm pretty sure were paid for by taxes. Like, they just no.
I'm going to defer to you. You're the national treasure.
Oh, for Christ's sake. Back to the note. The United States government, and we're only talking about the federal level here, does not need taxes in order to spend. In fact, it is impossible to tax until they create money via passing bills into law. I don't know what to say about this. I am now personally on a mission to teach people MMT.
What's that?
I think that is whatever this is all about, because he said that he's been studying this for a whole month and is now teaching.
So this is the thing that he wanted to...
I think he's trying to teach me this right now.
Okay.
Okay. This is just as important of a concept as Bernie Sanders teaching us that money in politics is the root of all evil. Knowing MMT empowers progressives because it cuts... Well, I don't label myself as one of those, but knowing MMT empowers progressives because it cuts through the bullshit that we have been fed for our entire lives, such as Hillary Clinton saying, yes, Bernie, but how will you pay for those ponies? I know the basics pretty well, and I know lots of people who know the subject intimately. Here are the resources. Okay, so at least he gives us some of his sources.
Okay.
A short article by economics professor Stephanie Kelton regarding Hillary Clinton's pony nonsense. And here's an opinion. So he gives me a link to an opinion piece in the LA Times, which opinions... Okay. The seminal MMT book, which is only about 60 pages long. Videos with Stephanie Kelton, who I've never heard of, but he says it's Bernie Sanders' economic advisor during his presidential campaign. Then there's links to 3 YouTube videos. The first 2 videos are an hour plus, but after listening to them, my life changed forever. The third is only 25 minutes long and inspired me to write an article. Okay. Finally, follow the Facebook group Modern Monetary Theory for Real Progressives. I really don't want to. I don't know what to say about any of this. Like, to say that taxes aren't real. Like, I know that our money isn't really connected to anything. I get that part of it. But like, I know that when I earn money, it has real purchasing power. And I'm turning over a lot of my purchasing power to the federal government, which then purchases things such as massive military systems and provides people real food and real healthcare. Like,
well, real food is,
but to say it's all not like that, it pays for it. Just, if these are the basics of this theory, like, no, right? Did any of that make sense, or am I just dense and tired? Like,
can I plead the fifth?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's
how I'm feeling. Like, I don't know. I don't know what he's talking about.
I guess thank you for sharing the information.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Have the intern look at it.
I think my dog is the closest thing I have to an intern. And she's kind of useless. Even though you're adorable. Yes, you are. Back to the note. I do interviews all the time and would love to talk to you if that interests you. My podcast is called People Conversations by Citizens Media TV. You will surely quickly exceed what I have to teach, and then I can pass you off to people who know way more than I do.
That sounds sexual.
I don't think he means it in a sexy way.
I don't know.
But I also am not all that interested in being preached to. I mean, conversations and trying to figure stuff out together, I'm always down for. But if someone has all the answers and they just want to like, I'm going to teach you all there is to know, like, I don't know how fun
we're going
that
back
sounds.
to that conversation about boundaries again and how
I know. Regardless, I hope you might consider learning this and start slowly sharing it with your listeners. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you for contributing, Jeff. I'm gonna move on. I don't really know what to make of that. So thank you. We also got $5 from Anna Gowries. This was a Venmo payment. She said, "Hi, Jen, no more freeloading. I have to start supporting your work, not only through subscription to your podcast, but also financially, so you can continue your research and I can continue my education. I really appreciate how thorough your research is, how deeply you dig into the stories, and also how you set the stage with the background information to give us the full picture. You are a true journalist and your work is impeccable. Thank you. I have sent $5 through Venmo and I will send something every month. In May 2017, I have finished my grad school with ready $166,000 in debt.
Wow.
Oh my God. I'm sure that alone can make a great topic for a segment in your podcast, hence my small contribution. I mean, I know that student debt is a huge problem. The only reason that I've never discussed it is because Congress is doing absolutely nothing about it. So, I mean, the minute you guys can pressure Congress into putting something in the law, like, I'm all for it. But I have nothing to say about it other than, like, the whole system's broken.
It is really.
Obviously.
I don't. That's a huge number.
Huge. Did you hear that Dustin just paid off his student loans and it hurt his credit?
I heard through the grapevine, maybe social media, but
which is another broken system, obviously. Like, oh, you freed yourself of an enormous debt. Congratulations. You're no longer like as worthy credit-wise. It makes no sense.
Is it because his revolving credit went down?
I don't know. I don't understand why these companies do what they do. I know that my credit is not yet exceptional. I'm still in the very good category because I don't have any loans. So like to start the business, I did it in cash. Like I've never taken money from the banks. Like I do not mix my world with, it's why I don't own anything. You know, I rent because I don't want to like owe the banks. I just like don't. So, but that's why like when I look at my credit, it's like, this is how you can improve it. I need to get a loan, like a 30-year mortgage or a car payment. Like it makes no sense. Like you have to get debt in order to.
You kind of need a broker to tell you how to get a better credit score. It'd be like, what kind of loans do I need to take out so I can improve my credit score? Which sounds like what happened with Dustin if he paid off his credit. His
when
debt.
I was talking to him about it at the bar, we both just kind of concluded like we would rather have no debt than an absolutely perfect credit score. It's like,
I know. And that would be like a lovely reason to be like, if you ever had to explain your credit score, it's like, well, it went down a couple points because I paid off my
as very good
$100,000 of student loans.
Yeah. Well, it's a difference between very good and exceptional. So it's like, I'll be very good and I'll still get whatever loan I want. Not that I'm taking out any loans. So whatever. But yeah, thank you, Anna. I appreciate your contribution. And then we got a $4.75. What? I'm losing my ability to speak. We got a $4.75 check from Garrick Smalley. This is a bonus because he is already a Patreon subscriber. Garrick is actually around here. He's from Berkeley. And he said, "Hey, Jen, I think you may have gone a bit off the rails with the last show, but frankly, I don't care. I've listened to all of your shows." And I don't know when he wrote this because like I didn't feel like the budget episode was all that crazy.
You don't have a timestamp for him?
Not
which
episode?
No. You don't know what episode he's talking about?
But he said, "I've listened to all of your shows and have learned something with each one, even this last one. Your need to teach yourself about our system has been an inspiration. Thank you. I have tried to get my family and some friends to listen to your show. No luck yet, but we will prevail. Here's the 8% of what I just spent on Amazon." Oh, cool. Be well, Garrick Smalley. Yeah, I don't know what episode he's talking about. It might be the nuclear weapons episode because that's where I was like mentally disturbed. If I had to bet.
That wasn't the last episode though.
It wasn't, but if he had written it right in the beginning of this episode cycle.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. But that's what I'm guessing because that's the one where I felt like I was like, I need to stop paying attention to this stuff. I'm going to lose my mind.
Oh my God. You're doing such a service to your country.
Yeah, well, I'm not doing much of a service to my mind. Let's see. And then one last email we got from a current subscriber is from Dick Atley. He is a $5 a month subscriber and has been for 2.5 years.
That's amazing.
I love Dick.
I love consistency.
Yes. And the subscribers, I mean, they're the only reason why I've been able to do this for so long because
it's really awesome.
I can budget. But here's his note. He said, "Hi, Jen. I've been a minimal $5 monthly supporter for almost the past 3 years, and yet somehow I'd not tuned in for quite a while. In fact, since I try to support quite a few people whose podcasts are important to me, I was thinking about bowing out of yours until I heard your excellent interview with Peter B. Collins, which literally forced me to download episodes 167 and 8. I really appreciated those, so I've got to start paying more attention and keep up the support. All I can afford on a small pension and Social Security." Hey, I appreciate people paying. I mean, if everybody did, we wouldn't be having any problems.
Right.
So in a way, I guess you consider this a raise over what would have been a withdrawal. I will take it. Anyway, several things came up in your thank you sessions of those podcasts, which I wanted to comment on. 1, your concerns about the effect long thank yous would have on users' data. It doesn't affect me since I have a wired internet connection and a laptop, but I suspected a lot of that impact would come from recording at a fairly high bit rate. I downloaded Congressional Dish 168 and it comes to 204 megabits. I loaded it into WavePad and saw it was recorded at 192 kilobits per second, which is way more than even high quality music requires, which is 128 kilobits per second. You know, I kind of noticed that too. I saved it at 48 kilobits per second, which has proved completely satisfactory for all the hundreds of podcasts I've listened to over the years. And the size was, as expected, cut by a factor of 4 to 51 megabytes. If you're megabytes. So if you're concerned about overstressing your users' data costs, you might consider cutting back on the recording rate, though I realize you may have not immediately noticeable reasons for a higher rate. I don't do the editing for this podcast. So that's what's going on. So Mike, you do with that what you will.
Yeah, maybe you could mention it. I don't know.
I don't know. But these are longer. So that would be a solution. I don't think we need the highest quality for the show. It's not like music. So yeah, that's a good suggestion. Number 2, when the subject of the Boston Marathon came up, you tossed off Tamerlan and Jahar loosely. Would you toss Oswald in the same way regarding the JFK execution? The evidence is so strong that they had little or nothing to do with that bombing apart from possibly being patsies. So I was startled to hear you say that. Are you not familiar with that evidence? No. And Miranda and I were both living in Boston during those bombings. I've paid a lot of attention to this. I think it's pretty safe to say that they were involved. I mean, I saw the video. I saw them put down the backpacks. Like,
I heard the gunshots. I smelled the gunpowder.
Like, was literally in Watertown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
no. Whatever evidence you're talking about, I am unaware. So feel free to send it over, but you're going to have a tough time convincing me of this one.
Hey, Jen, do you know the 2 best days of a boat owner's life?
No.
It's the day you buy the boat and the day you catch a terrorist on it. Okay. Tough crowd today.
Well, I just don't think that would be a great day because they shot the shit out of his boat.
I was just saying, America.
Can you just imagine being that guy for a second? Like, remember when they gave the all clear? It was like 5 p.m. on the warmest day of the spring so far. And it was like a little bit windy. But I remember I went outside and I'm like, oh, I'm outdoors. It's so nice. And this poor guy goes out to smoke a butt and just sees the flap on his boat and like peeks inside and there's a bloody terrorist. Like, and that's not even a British slang. Like, he found a bloody terrorist in his boat. Like, I can't.
I was under the impression that he saw the flap and just called and was like, hey, suspicious flap.
I am pretty sure he looked.
I don't know. I wasn't there. I was trapped in my apartment.
Because it was windy, remember? So like it was hitting the boat and he like went to see where I was open and like looked and just saw like a bloody thing and was like, oh my God.
Were you in Boston proper?
I was in Arlington.
Okay. I was in Watertown.
Yeah, you were like in the middle of it.
I was under martial law. I could not leave. I could not open the door to walk out onto my porch because there were tanks and military vehicles on my street.
That's so insane.
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
I felt like it was really easy to go under martial law. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
I was like,
and they did
that
it
happened
to
fast.
all of Boston. Like for you, in a way, it kind of made sense because we knew there was a terrorist in your neighborhood. He was in Watertown, had thrown a pressure cooker bomb at the cops, like was there.
Yeah, I heard. That's the part I heard.
You heard the pressure cooker?
Because I was just a couple blocks from that.
Yeah.
It
makes sense for you, but the fact that like East Boston and South Boston, like and the whole MBTA was shut down, that's where I felt like there is kind of like a Boston badass factor where like, we're gonna get you. But at the same time,
I mean,
it was one kid.
Right. And one teenager.
19 and wounded.
Yeah, it was not a pleasant time.
No.
I know that like the SWAT team was in Freddie's apartment and it just was really scary because I couldn't leave. You couldn't leave you couldn't even open the door and go onto the porch. And it was really warm that day. It was the first warm day. And I remember opening all the windows and I could hear just like things you don't normally hear, like your neighbors. Oh my God, dude. I didn't realize that I had a little bit of PTSD from helicopters until maybe a year later, and when I was working alone in the office in Boston that I had at the time, and I heard a helicopter because there was there were helicopters because there was a Boston Common, not a riot, but like people were just marching in Boston Common for something.
Probably just a protest.
Yeah, I can't remember what it was, but I remember that the helicopters being out, and all of a sudden my heart started racing, and I didn't even know why. And then I realized I registered it as the helicopter, but it was just horrible. It was horrible. It was like a really scary, horrible. I don't know. It was just scary because you didn't know what was going to happen, and just being like locked in your apartment, watching the news. You know,
were you listening to the police scanners?
Freddie was. I wasn't. I was just watching just network news.
Okay.
But the thing about that was they didn't really know. They were reporting.
They knew nothing.
They were reporting what they kind of thought was going on or what just happened. So it was very chaotic, and
it was the police scanners where you could find out what was really going on. And I remember at 2 p.m. because we were in Arlington, so we weren't technically in the lockdown zone, but like we were, just because like no one was going outside. The MBTA was down. Our car was stuck behind our neighbors. Like we really couldn't go. And listening on the police scanners, that's why like the way they did the lockdown was so weird to me, that they did it in downtown Boston, because we were closer to Watertown by like a lot. And there was no water in between Watertown and us. You know, like you could walk. I have walked because the police command thing was at my Best Buy. You know, it was only like 2 miles away. And when I was listening to the police scanner, they were searching on the other side of my house. And it was at around like 2 o'clock where their net got so big. I was like, they fucking lost him, you know? But like the cops weren't, or the TV wasn't telling you that. It wasn't until the all clear, which like surprised everyone at 5 o'clock, but it didn't surprise me because for 3 hours, they're looking in like Harvard and all over the place. They're looking in, like there was one in Bedford. Like that's way out there, and it was way outside of the lockdown zone too. So once they like had the net that big, I was like, oh boy, this is crazy. And then at 5 o'clock, they're like, it's all good.
Yeah, that was so left.
So weird.
We left because they were like, okay, you can leave, and we were like, we're leaving. We're allowed to leave. So we went to the grocery store because at that time I was, you know, Freddie and I had just started dating, and I wasn't the wonderful wife that I am now. We didn't have a stocked fridge. So I was like, we got to go get food just in case this happens again. Like we had nothing.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
we
Joe and I
didn't have
I
reserves.
went in the backyard, but that's as far as I was going. Cause I was just like, what do you mean it's all clear? Like we had to be locked down the whole day, and now we're just safe.
They were like, we're safe. So I got into my car. I went to pick up Freddie because he lived in his own place, which was 1 street away from where they found the guy on the boat. And I picked him up, and me and my roommate at the time and Freddie, we went to Shaw's on the highway above the Pike, the Bass Pike.
Okay.
It's a weird Shaw's. It literally goes above the highway.
Yeah, I don't think I've been in that one. Plus, you should go to Market Basket. So much cheaper.
Whatever. We just needed to get food. And we went there, and that's when the shootout happened. Like it happened while we were out. So after everything was safe, that's when the big shootout happened.
Well, and that was so fast after, because the sun hadn't gone down yet.
No, it was
really quick.
It was the amount of time it was like, okay, you can leave your house, for me to get into the car, drive 2 or 3 streets to where Freddie was, pick him up, and then drive to
I'm going to say
Shaw's.
It was maybe 45 minutes.
Yeah, it was. I would say so too.
Because we had our like 15 minutes of like, are they really calling this off? And then I went in the backyard just to be warm.
Just to be free.
Not even
just to be free again.
No, it really wasn't even the freedom. I didn't mind the lockdown. I really didn't.
I hated
it. To be completely honest, I thought it was fun. I wasn't in the zone like you were. Yeah. So at 9 a.m., I was like, oh my God, this is so crazy.
Like snow day with no snow.
Yep. Cracked my first beer at 9 a.m. I was like, Joe, put on your PJ pants. You're not leaving. And sure enough, like he didn't have to go to work. And so we started drinking beers at 9 a.m., but it was the warmth. I had been so cold for 6 months, and that weather was great. If that weather had been on Monday, I probably would have been more willing to go to the marathon itself, but it was still too cold on Monday. But on Friday, and I couldn't go outside. I was like, oh my God, it's the warmest day and it's going to get cold again this weekend. Like, I just want to go outside. So I went outside just to be warm for like 5 minutes. And then I saw the chopper. It was like, vroom. I was like, oh, they found him. And then I went back inside and like, the rest is history. But the moral of the story is that history was that Jahar was in the boat. Yeah, I'm pretty confident in being able to say they were involved. I think there might be other people involved.
Is this dude saying that he doesn't think Jahar was on the boat?
Here's literally what he said. He said, the evidence is so strong that they had little or nothing to do with that bombing apart from possibly being patsies. I have seen nothing to suggest that. So if you want to send it my way, I'm always down to geek out on the Boston Marathon bombing. But no, I don't know what you're referring to. Back to his note, he said, 3, one of your donors recommended James Corbett. For the past 5 years, he's been my primary go-to podcast, despite my disagreements with some of his basic philosophical positions. Like you, he's a stickler for documenting his research, but by not specializing in congressional issues, he casts a big net of topics which have rather thoroughly altered my sense of what's going on in the world. He pulled a large chunk of that widespread research together in the 2 documentaries mentioned by the person who recommended him, who is Bud Johnson. And those documentaries were How Big Oil Conquered the World and Why Big Oil Conquered the World, which are available in video, audio, and in transcript form. Maybe we should just have a movie night and like geek out on these documentaries, because this is too many people being like, you have to see it. Like, that'd be fun.
Freddie would love that.
Yeah. And like, you guys can come snuggle Abby. Yeah, that would be fun. He says the titles would be rather misleading to anyone who has not followed the arc of his work, in that it isn't big oil as such that is the subject, but the actions of and connections between players connected to big oil over the past 150 years, and the generally nefarious role they have played in our medical and educational systems, eugenics and technocracy, the environmental movement, and many of the major geopolitical upheaval events about which consumers of traditional media and history are by and large clueless. The point of all this is to say that while I acknowledge that taking a total of 3 hours to watch or listen while driving, hauling firewood, washing dishes, cooking, etc., these 2 documentaries could potentially be a camel's backbreaker in your overloaded schedule, I think you wouldn't regret the experience. Thanks for a tremendous service, Dick Atlee of Southwest Harbor, Maine. And I actually enjoy documentaries. Like, I just have to be in a place where they don't feel like work for me. So if it was like us having a night where we're hanging out, like watching it, like that probably wouldn't feel work, but
or maybe you could come to our place.
Yeah, either way.
We got a new rug. It's beautiful.
Ooh, my dog's gonna poop on it.
No, she does really well. She does not poop in the house.
Give her time.
She pooped in the house this last time.
The web
it was
of
the first,
lies.
It was the first time. It was the first time. I swear.
But it was
under the kitchen table.
She's doing that in my place too.
Really?
Yeah. It's just, I don't know what her problem is.
It was really honestly the first time, and Freddie found it.
I know. It's anxiety connected, I'm sure.
It was the first day, so I thought maybe it was just an adjustment. But it was honestly the
it's
first
anxiety.
time.
When she stays at Dom's, last time she stayed at Dom's, she pooped every day because she hates his dogs so much. Like, she loves Dom and Lucero, which are, for those of you who don't know them, the humans. And she loves the kitty. Her and Kitty get along great. But Alfred the bulldog.
Yeah, not a fan.
Not a fan. They're fine to get along, but he just can like crush her, and he has so much energy, and he's like, dog, play with me.
He's a little derpy and a whole lot drooly.
And so much energy, and she is a pillow. So she's like, get away from me. I hate you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and she's fine with Alfred in the backyard where they can like have their space. But he gives her anxiety, so she poops in his house. Which I shouldn't laugh at. I should feel guilty about, but I still think it's funny. So at least he has hardwood floors. I'm sorry she pooped on your new rug.
No, it was under the kitchen table.
Okay.
No rug.
All right. Well, still,
it was
I'm sorry.
It was on the linoleum.
Well, we're trying to train her out of it, but it's difficult.
Like I said, first time.
Well, probably won't be the last. Apologies in advance.
Whatever. You're lucky she's cute.
She is. All right. So thank you for doing this with me. Thank you, Ryan.
Are we
Delisle.
done? We done?
We're done. Time for kickball. But thank you, Ryan Delisle and Joe Briney, for coming with me to Puerto Rico. I love you both. Thank you, Jessica and Margie of Interview Connections, for being out there pimping me. Thank you, Daryl, Karen, Mike, and Carrie at Pro Podcast Solutions for all of the editing and transcripts and clips and putting up with my disorganized crap. Thank you, Jessica Hershey of jessicahershey.com for getting the work done, even though I don't communicate with you nearly enough. Like, she just has to be like, so are we doing episodes?
Oh, man.
Like, hi, Jess. Yeah, she puts up with me very well. Thank you, Brian of Only Child Imaginations, who I have not told the subject yet. God damn it. He's another one who puts up with my crap. Damn it. Brian, I'll email you.
You know what? It sounds like you need a sound bath.
It's,
I'm just kidding.
Really?
I'm kidding. We're going.
Sound bath. Thank you, Lauren, my lovely sister. And thank you, Dad, for all of, I'm thanking my dad for doing all of my finances, and it's really nice. But my dad is geeking out so hard. He's like so fascinated by this whole business model. So it's like I got back from Puerto Rico, I had all these emails. He's like, just for fun, I ran all these scenarios to like let you know.
Oh my God, I would love to see that.
It's awesome. But he's just so funny. Like, he's having so much fun, like looking in my finances and being like, wow, like this is how it's working on PayPal and Patreon, and these are the trends. And like, he's so into it. So while I am thankful, I think he should also thank me because I'm giving him all the fun.
Spoken like a true daughter.
Dad, thank me for doing my work.
Dad, thank you for thanking me.
And with that, we're going to go kick balls.
Yeah. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for going to Puerto Rico and reporting back. That's really,
I went on vacation.
Invaluable. Yeah, but it's still really good to hear from a trusted source.
It was harder to get to than Puerto Vallarta. That is for damn sure. So you are welcome.
Thanks.
But yeah, thanks for doing this. It's always fun.
All right. I'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
We're surrounded now by liars coming at us through our TV screens.
We don't have a domestic spying program.
They're content to fight in black and white despite the many in-betweens. We got a president who plays with the facts. And then he waves a flag to cover his tracks. As if a lie is alright, if the end will justify the means. Now we are so damn tired of being lied to.
The polar ice caps aren't going away.
We don't think we can deny it anymore. You can stick to your story if you think it lies. But we're not keeping quiet anymore. We are so damn tired of being lied to.
Government jobs consume the profits of the private sector.
We don't think we can deny it anymore.